Chapter 1479, Untitled. Chapter 1479, Untitled. What? Mrs. Wa couldn't believe her ears. How dare that Feng Wu? Mrs. Dugu smirked. That girl thinks she has His Royal Highness's favor, so she's so full of herself now. She's even bold enough to disrespect Her Majesty. Mrs. Wa clicked her tongue. That Feng Wu is so arrogant. I bet His Majesty hates her so much now. Mrs. Dugu nodded. If Her Majesty can't be treated, Feng Wu is going to get the blame. When that happens, no matter how His Royal Highness tries to protect her, she's still going to die. The two ladies weren't the only ones talking about it. Everyone gathered together in twos and threes, worried about the Empress Dowager's illness while feeling excited over the rumor about the Feng clan. And all they talked about was, if the Empress Dowager died, what kind of situation would Feng Wu be in? Countless people couldn't wait to see Feng Wu in trouble. It just so happened that Feng Wu came back at that moment. She was carrying a basket on her back, and it was filled with branches with dark green leaves that gave off a faint fragrance. Look, Feng Wu is back. It really is her. How dare she come back now? She's so going to die. Feng Lu had been waiting outside the outpost for Feng Wu. As soon as she saw her, she ran toward her at top speed. Feng Wu. Feng Lu's eyes spat fire. She glared at Feng Wu, as if trying to burn Feng Wu to ash with the fury in her eyes. Feng Wu frowned a little, glanced at her, and tried to walk around her. However, Feng Lu wouldn't let her leave. Feng Wu, you're too ashamed to see me, aren't you? You can't even meet my eyes. Feng Wu, do you know how outrageous you've been? Feng Wu, I don't care what happens to you, but why would you incriminate the entire Feng clan? Feng Wu, what happened to my father is all your fault. Knowing that she couldn't defeat Feng Wu, Feng Lu could only follow her as she complained. But Feng Wu couldn't even be bothered to look at her. Until, Feng Wu. A cold voice rang out behind them. Feng Wu narrowed her eyes and turned around. It was indeed Feng Yiran. Come with me. Feng Yiran led her away. Father has been removed from his office because of you, and he's been badly injured. Don't you feel guilty at all? Feng Yanfeng? Feng Wu thought about her fence-sitting uncle. She had no affection for that uncle, but Feng Yanfeng could still be a useful pawn in the future, so she knew that she should visit him. Lead the way, Feng Wu said coldly. The Feng clan was no longer one of the 9 major families, and they weren't ranked very high either. Therefore, their living quarters were quite far from the center. Feng Yanfeng was sulking when Feng Wu arrived. Father, Feng Wu is here. Feng Yiran led Feng Wu to Feng Yanfeng. Feng Yanfeng felt a pang in his chest. Feng Wu. She was the reason behind everything. At that thought, Feng Yanfeng stared at Feng Wu in disbelief, and his gaze reminded her of icy blades. Chapter 1480, Untitled. Chapter 1480, Untitled. How dare you come here? Feng Yanfeng threw the bowl of medicine in his hand directly at Feng Wu's face. The thick liquid in the bowl arced through the air as it flew at Feng Wu. Luckily, she reacted in time and immediately stepped aside to dodge the bowl and the liquid. Thump! The bowl broke into pieces on the floor with a crisp sound. Feng Yanfeng was even more furious when he saw Feng Wu move away. How dare you? Feng Wu, how dare you? Feng Yanfeng sprang up from his bed and asked, Tell me, what on earth did you do? Feng Wu frowned and looked confused. What do you mean? Quit pretending. Cough. Feng Yanfeng was shaking from head to toe. If you haven't done something to offend His Majesty, why would he blame it on me? You're the one who got me in trouble. Don't you realize that? Feng Wu was speechless. Feng Yanfeng stared at Feng Wu. Speak. What on earth did you do? Feng Wu shrugged and looked all innocent. I didn't do anything. As for why His Majesty is mad at you, how about you go ask him yourself? Just then, she heard light footsteps nearby. Steward Feng quickly came in and whispered something in Feng Yanfeng's ear before he backed away. Feng Yanfeng was completely astounded by the news. He looked at Feng Wu as if she was an idiot. You! Feng Wu still looked very innocent. What? Feng Yanfeng couldn't stop trembling. When he pointed at Feng Wu, his finger trembled as well, which showed how astonished he was. You could have saved Her Majesty, but you didn't. Feng Wu. You turned away from the Empress Dowager. Feng Yanfeng wanted to kill Feng Wu right there and then. She would have been generously rewarded if she had saved the Empress Dowager, and the entire Feng clan could have risen because of it. The crime for not helping the Empress Dowager was so severe that the entire Feng clan could be killed for it. How could you do that? Feng Yanfeng was so agitated that he couldn't form a coherent sentence, and he glared at Feng Wu. We can overlook the generous reward, but we can't possibly survive the punishment. Feng Wu, you're taking the entire clan down with you. Feng Yanfeng's eyes were bloodshot, and blue veins popped on his forehead. He was so agitated. And when he said those words, he wasn't the only one agitated. OMG! Feng Wu has. Feng Wu. How dare you? Lady Wang, Feng Yanfeng, Feng Sang, and Feng Lu all stood there in astonishment. Their heads went blank, and they all trembled violently. Feng Wu left the Empress Dowager when the latter was severely ill. That was enough to have the entire Feng clan killed. Feng Wu, I'm going to kill you. Feng Wu, how dare you? Feng Wu, go to hell. Lady Wang trembled violently, and her heart raced. She rushed over to Feng Yanfeng and yelled, Master, our clan can't keep this girl anymore. We won't know how to teach her. Master, after what she did to you, do you want to see the same thing happen to our children? Feng Yanfeng was so exasperated and shocked that he spat out a mouthful of blood. Cough, cough. After his coughing fit, Feng Yanfeng looked up, and his eyes were bloodshot red. Chapter 1481, Untitled. Chapter 1481, Untitled. Feng Wu, go to hell. His voice was so loud that it was like a thunderclap in the ears of the others. Wow. People were already talking about what was going on with the Feng clan, and they were even more curious now. Lord Mu was in charge, and he quickly headed over. Since Lord Mu was here, so were Master Zhua and Master Dugu. All three were people Feng Yanfeng had tried to befriend recently, but he wasn't happy to see them now. Lord Mu couldn't care less. He told Feng Yanfeng when he arrived, Old Feng, let's talk like civilized people. Shouting won't solve anything. Master Zhua glanced at Feng Wu and smiled at Feng Yanfeng. Feng Wu is only a kid now, and she needs more guidance. Don't rush it. Feng Yanfeng almost choked on his own breath. That brat. She Feng Yanfeng almost couldn't breathe. The Empress Dowager's life is hanging in the balance, but she went off to have fun. She's trying to ruin our clan. I won't have it. Feng Yanfeng struggled to his feet and grabbed Lord Mu's hand. My lord, you and the other officials are going to be my witnesses today. I'm going to make an announcement as the head of the Feng clan. Feng Yanfeng glared at Feng Wu and stressed each word. From now on, Feng Wu isn't a member of the Feng clan anymore. What? That announcement was unexpected but predictable at the same time. Old Feng, Lord Mu said calmly, let's talk it over. I'm sure we can solve this. Removing her name from the clan is such a big deal that you have to be sure. Lady Wang and the others looked expectantly at Feng Yanfeng. They had waited for this day for so long. Both Master Zhua and Master Dugu tried to make Feng Yanfeng reconsider his decision. However, Feng Yanfeng shook his head decisively. No, I've given it enough thought already. Feng Wu has to be kicked out today. Master Zhua shook his head and sighed. He then shot a warning glance at Feng Wu. Kiddo, what are you doing just standing there? Do you really want to get your name removed from the clan and become a lonely soul with no one to depend on? You should be pleading with your uncle right now. To have one's name removed from their clan was such a big deal that everyone was convinced that Feng Wu would panic, but Feng Wu just stood there with the sunlight behind her. The look on her face was very calm, and she was completely unperturbed. She smiled a little and asked quietly, "Are you going to remove my name from the clan?" All eyes were on her. Feng Wu smirked. "Do you think you can do that just because you want to?" "What?" Everyone's stomachs lurched. That was so arrogant. "Feng Wu, I'm your uncle and the head of the clan. I have the right." "The head of the clan?" "For now. You don't know what will happen in the future." Feng Wu smirked. "You," Feng Yanfeng wanted to say something else, but Feng Wu waved him off. "We'll talk about it later, we'll see who gets kicked out in the end." Feng Wu sounded impatient. "I don't have time for this. Wait until I'm not busy." She left after those words. Just like that. Everyone watched in disbelief as she walked away. Chapter 1482, Untitled. Chapter 1482, Untitled. That wasn't what they were expecting. It shouldn't have played out like that. "Take her down. Bring that brat to me." Feng Yanfeng bellowed, feeling that his authority had been severely challenged. However, no one moved. Feng Yiran and Feng Lu weren't Feng Wu's match. Master Zhua and the others would only play the happy onlookers and wouldn't offer any help. Feng Yanfeng didn't know what to do. He was the only one who could handle Feng Wu now. At that thought, he pounced at Feng Wu like a hungry wolf. He decided that he would regain his lost dignity himself. Crack! Feng Yanfeng grabbed Feng Wu's shoulder from behind. However, he immediately felt a stabbing pain in his fingers, as if he had been hit by some invincible power. Whoosh! Feng Yanfeng involuntarily drew back his hand and stared at Feng Wu in astonishment. "What are you wearing?" There was a line of needle marks on Feng Yanfeng's palm. Feng Wu narrowed her eyes. She was wearing a simple vest, which Jun Linyuan had put on her when she was asleep. She wanted to take it off and throw it away, but Jun Linyuan wouldn't let her no matter what. Who would have thought that the soft vest would be so useful? Feng Wu sneered at Feng Yanfeng and turned to leave. That brat! Feeling utterly humiliated, Feng Yanfeng thought he was going to explode. Lord Mu and the others felt embarrassed for Feng Yanfeng as well. As the head of the Feng clan, he tried to remove Feng Wu from the clan, but humiliated himself instead. Master Zhua was very disappointed in Feng Yanfeng as well. Word of Feng Yanfeng trying to remove Feng Wu from the clan soon got out. With so many people staying in the small outpost, they all gathered in small groups and the news spread very quickly. What? The Feng clan is going to kick Feng Wu out? But why? Why do you think? I heard that Master Feng was removed from his post because of Feng Wu. Has she been kicked out already? I don't think so. Why? Don't you see? His Royal Highness is behind Feng Wu. He takes her with him everywhere, which is why she's so arrogant. Even if Master Feng wants to kick her out, he still has to consider the Crown Prince's feelings. That Feng Wu is so. Feng Wu went straight back to her building after she left the Feng clan. She hadn't gone out to stroll about, but to pick some herbs. The Empress Dowager had been sick for so long that Feng Wu had to use a herb known as dragonwood fiber. However, it wasn't a common herb and could be quite difficult to find. Feng Wu left very early that morning, and with her pet's help, she finally found one. After washing the dragonwood fiber clean, Feng Wu deftly prepared it. She was familiar with the process, so in less than an hour, the dragonwood fiber had been turned into a small pile of black powder. She then poured the powder into a small porcelain vial. The vial was the size of a pinky, and just big enough for the dragonwood fiber powder. Feng Wu handed the vial to Granny Gong. Take this to Master Chu. With how smart Granny Gong was, she immediately saw that it was a life-saving ingredient for the Empress Dowager. Feng Wu said, "Boil 3 bowls of water until only 1 bowl is left, then pour the dragonwood fiber powder in. Can't be more than the size of a fingernail, but don't put in too little either." Chapter 1483 Untitled. Chapter 1483 Untitled. Granny Gong nodded, but she couldn't help prodding Feng Wu. "Miss Wu, why don't you take it to Her Majesty yourself?" Feng Wu said coldly, "That's not necessary. Granny Gong, just go ahead." The Empress Dowager had been so mean to Feng Wu, so she had no reason to go near the old lady. She wasn't a masochist. As for improving her image with the Empress Dowager, Feng Wu didn't see any point in doing that. Granny Gong smiled bitterly. The Empress Dowager was indeed inclined to be hostile toward Feng Wu, and their relationship would only worsen if they saw each other now. It would be better that they stayed away from each other. Granny Gong quickly headed back to the Empress Dowager with the dragonwood fiber powder. Meanwhile, Master Chu was very anxious. Sweat was rolling down his forehead. He was facing a very critical situation. He thought that there was a 70% chance of success, but once he cut the Empress Dowager open, that hope disappeared. What should he do? Looking at the cut he made in the Empress Dowager's head, Master Chu felt a chill run down his spine, and his hands turned cold. "Master Chu? Doctor?" Master Bai was Master Chu's assistant, and he lost most hope when he saw the blood gushing out of the Empress Dowager's forehead. When he noticed Master Chu's pale face, Master Bai almost passed out. Master Chu waved his hand and blinked hard. He told himself not to panic and to calm down. He had experienced quite a few critical moments in his life and had narrowly escaped death a few times, but he had survived them all, hadn't he? Wait. Feng Wu. The idea struck Master Chu, and he told Master Bai to fetch Feng Wu immediately. Emperor Wu grabbed Master Bai as soon as he left the room. "How did it go? How's the Empress Dowager?" Emperor Wu wasn't the only one waiting outside. The entire royal family was there. There were Empress Dugu, concubine Oriole, the 3rd and 5th princesses, and the princes. Everyone looked anxiously at Master Bai. Master Bai was almost in tears and said loudly, "Her Majesty is in critical condition right now, and her life is hanging in the balance. I have to find Miss Feng Wu now. She's our only hope." Feng Wu was their only hope? Empress Dugu had a complicated feeling in her heart. If Feng Wu didn't come and the Empress Dowager died, it would be the best news for her. Just then, Granny Gong came into view. "Miss Feng Wu." As soon as Master Bai spoke, Granny Gong shook her head and said, "Miss Wu isn't here, but she had me bring the medicine. Here's some dragonwood fiber powder, which is good for stopping the bleeding. To use it." After calmly repeating the instructions, Granny Gong handed over the bottle containing the powder. Master Bai's eyes lit up. He took the bottle with both hands and ran back inside without so much as a thank you. Right now, everyone was concerned about the Empress Dowager. But 1 or 2 individuals still wanted to stir up trouble. "Is this dragonwood fiber powder freshly made?" Jun Wuxia, the 3rd princess, stared at Granny Gong. Granny Gong said, "Yes." Jun Wuxia asked, "Granny Gong, did you meet Feng Wu just then?" Granny Gong said, "Yes." Jun Wuxia said, "So, she's here in the outpost?" Granny Gong said, "Yes." Jun Wuxia stared at Granny Gong with her cold eyes. "If that's the case, why won't Feng Wu come here and treat the Empress Dowager herself?" Immediately, everyone gave Granny Gong strange looks. That was right. Why? Chapter 1484 Untitled. Chapter 1484 Untitled. The 5th princess said, "I heard that Her Majesty wouldn't let Feng Wu treat her." Jun Wuxia waved her off. "Her Majesty can dislike Feng Wu as much as she wants, but Feng Wu has a duty to treat Her Majesty. Since she sent the dragonwood fiber powder, She has to know that Her Majesty is in critical condition. Why won't she come here when Her Majesty's life is hanging in the balance? What hidden agenda does Feng Wu have? Empress Dugu had raised Jun Wuxia into a spoiled princess. She had always been willful and reckless, so why would she suddenly become so sensible and methodical? Granny Gong kept her gaze on the princess and realized that someone had to be helping her out. She looked from Jun Wuxia to a maid standing next to her. The maid was called Yulian. Yulian's stomach lurched when she saw the look in Granny Gong's eyes. Granny Gong, don't you want to explain on Feng Wu's behalf? If not, should we conclude that Feng Wu is disrespecting Her Majesty? Jun Wuxia smiled at Granny Gong. Having served in the imperial palace for so many years, Granny Gong was too experienced to be intimidated by Jun Wuxia. She said calmly, Miss Wu indeed knows how critical Her Majesty's condition is. She knew that 3 days ago. Wow! All eyes were on Granny Gong, and everyone was shocked by that bold statement. Granny Gong went on. Miss Wu also knew that Her Majesty would need the dragonwood fiber powder today, so she went out with a basket before sunrise this morning on her own and went into the mountains. She searched throughout the day until the moon rose, when she finally found a dragonwood fiber plant. She then brought it back and turned it into a powder. After a pause, Granny Gong added, Miss Wu knows that Her Majesty doesn't like her, so to avoid agitating Her Majesty and exacerbating her condition, Miss Wu gave up this great opportunity to show off her contribution. Looking around, Granny Gong said, If you don't believe me, just wait and see. If Master Chu can save Her Majesty with the dragonwood fiber powder, you'll know I'm telling the truth and how sincere Miss Feng Wu is. That was an impressive speech. Not only did Granny Gong sabotage the trap Jun Wuxia had set, she also made Feng Wu out to be someone who wasn't eager to claim credit. Jun Wuxia clenched her fists angrily and glared at Granny Gong. Granny Gong wasn't intimidated at all, and only smiled back at her. The atmosphere felt rather strange. Just then, the closed door finally opened. Master Chu and Master Bai came out, supporting each other. How did it go? Emperor Wu was the first to react, and he grabbed Master Chu's arm. Master Chu looked like someone who had just escaped death. He breathed out slowly, and there was a faint smile on his face. He said, It was very dangerous at first, and we almost didn't succeed. Luckily, Miss Feng Wu's dragonwood fiber powder arrived in time. Otherwise, the consequence would have been unthinkable. Master Bai shook his head as well. Her Majesty wouldn't stop bleeding. Without the powder, she wouldn't have made it. She would have died. Everyone knew what Master Bai meant. That was why they were so shocked. Is that dragonwood fiber powder so miraculous? Emperor Wu cried out. Master Chu said, A medicine is the most valuable when it's used correctly. Miss Feng Wu is a genius in this respect. I would never have thought about this medicine myself. Chapter 1485, Untitled. Chapter 1485, Untitled. Master Bai couldn't stop praising Feng Wu either. Miss Feng Wu's medical skills are impeccable. With one look, she knows all the steps to be taken. She's more than talented. She's the greatest genius ever. Master Chu and Master Bai showered Feng Wu with compliments and wouldn't stop talking, which annoyed many others. Especially Jun Wuxia, who had gone pale with rage. Seeing that the Empress Dowager was out of danger, Granny Gong left the crowd. Emperor Wu was the one at a loss now. Late that night, Emperor Wu and Empress Dugu sat on the bed. Seeing the big frown on Emperor Wu's face, Empress Dugu held his hand. Emperor Wu's grip was forceful. Empress Dugu caressed Emperor Wu's face gently and said softly, Your Majesty, are you worried about Her Majesty? Didn't Master Chu say that Her Majesty is no longer in danger now? She'll be fine once she wakes up tomorrow morning. Emperor Wu smiled bitterly. I'm not worried about Her Majesty. I just don't know. Empress Dugu asked, Yes. Emperor Wu rubbed his forehead. He had been too impulsive today and had embarrassed himself. With how smart Empress Dugu was, she immediately guessed what it was about, so she asked with a smile, "Your Majesty, is it about Feng Yanfeng?" Emperor Wu heaved a long sigh and nodded. He didn't need to hide it from his Zidong. Caressing Emperor Wu's hand, Empress Dugu smiled. "Your Majesty, why don't you give Feng Yanfeng his job back?" Emperor Wu rubbed his forehead. "Won't that make me look indecisive?" Empress Dugu hesitated before asking, "Your Majesty, what do you have in mind?" Emperor Wu asked, "How about I make Feng Wu a lord? What do you think?" Deep down, Empress Dugu was displeased. She's already a princess. Does becoming a lord really suit her? Your Majesty, how about you give her something she can actually use? Emperor Wu asked, such as. To stop Feng Wu from getting another title, Empress Dugu became quite generous. "I heard that Feng Yanfeng tried to expel Feng Wu from the clan. Although he didn't get to do it in the end, that still gives us a hint." "Where will Feng Wu live if she really is kicked out of her clan?" asked Emperor Wu. "If I remember correctly, isn't there a manor on Dongyuan Street? Your Majesty, how about you give the place to her?" Empress Dugu was in fact very reluctant. She had had her eye on that manor on Dongyuan Street for a while, and had wanted to give it to her nephew. Compared with promoting Feng Wu, however, the manor was nothing. The manor has been deserted for many years, and it used to be General Wei Wu's residence. I certainly can give it to her. In fact, although Feng Wu had indirectly saved the Empress Dowager, Emperor Wu still didn't like Feng Wu very much. That was because he deemed Feng Wu to be the same type of person as Jun Linyuan, who was aloof, arrogant, and had no consideration for other people. The chief steward went to deliver the imperial edict himself. Because Feng Wu was a member of the Feng clan, the imperial edict naturally was taken to the Feng family's tent. "Father, there's an imperial edict for Feng Wu." Feng Yiran immediately told Feng Yanfeng the news. Feng Yanfeng struggled out of bed. The chief steward just happened to walk in, and Feng Yanfeng saluted him. As the general steward for the entire imperial palace, the chief steward was a respected figure. Wherever he went, people would try to fawn on him. Chapter 1486, Untitled. Chapter 1486, Untitled. Even Feng Yanfeng had to greet the chief steward with a bow. The chief steward was a fair, chubby elderly man with a Buddha-like smile, which made him seem very approachable. He smiled at Feng Yanfeng and said, "Master Feng, you're too polite. Now, I have an imperial edict for Miss Feng Wu. Please bring her out here to hear it." Feng Yanfeng paled when he heard this. Because of Feng Wu, he lost his job yesterday. He felt he had nothing left now. That just showed how much His Majesty didn't like Feng Wu. And now, there was an imperial edict, and it was directed at Feng Wu alone. It didn't take a genius to figure out how terrifying the imperial edict would be. It couldn't possibly be anything good. At that thought, Feng Yanfeng finally summoned up his courage and smiled bitterly. "Sir, you've come a little too late. I'm terribly sorry." "Really?" The chief steward raised his eyebrows. Feng Yanfeng said, "Starting from yesterday, Feng Wu has been expelled from the Feng clan. That is to say, after that, whatever she does has nothing to do with the clan." Lady Wang, Feng Yiran, and the others immediately chimed in, "That's right." They decided that they were done paying for Feng Wu's mistakes. The chief steward frowned a little. "Do you mean it?" Feng Yanfeng nodded repeatedly. Yes, of course. Feng Wu has nothing to do with the Feng clan now, so any of her punishments or rewards will have nothing to do with our clan." "Well," the chief steward heaved a long sigh. "Master Feng, are you sure? I hope you won't regret it." Feng Yanfeng smiled bitterly. "Of course I won't. The decision was made yesterday." The chief steward nodded. "Even if that's the case, because this is an imperial edict, the edict table has to sit here, and Miss Feng has to come out here as well. Feng Yanfeng had no problem with that. Even if the imperial edict was about Feng Wu's punishment, his family wasn't going to be involved anymore. Feng Wu was meditating when she was disturbed by the noise outside. Granny Gong told her about the imperial edict. Feng Wu frowned a little. "Can't he come here?" Granny Gong smiled. "He can, according to regular practice. However, the chief steward insisted on having the edict table set there. I'm sure he has a reason for it." She then added, "The chief steward really likes His Royal Highness, so don't worry. He won't trick us. I'm sure he knows what he's doing." Feng Wu shrugged. "Let's go and have a look then." Deep down, she already had a faint idea. After all, she had saved the Empress Dowager, so the Emperor was bound to give her some reward, even if it was just for show. Unfortunately, only a handful of people knew that she had saved the Empress Dowager, and that didn't include Feng Yanfeng and his people. In the Feng clan's camp. As soon as Feng Wu arrived, Feng Yanfeng's family stared at her with eyes filled with hatred. It was especially the case with Feng Lu, and she didn't try to hide her hatred toward Feng Wu. Feng Wu shrugged. "Feng Wu, how dare you come here?" Feng Lu growled in Feng Wu's ear. Feng Wu asked casually, "Why wouldn't I dare?" Feng Lu asked, "Did you know that my father lost his job because of you?" Feng Wu smirked. "Why don't you ask your father how he got that minister job in the first place?" She had pulled some strings, and Feng Yanfeng still owed her 100,000 spiritual stones for it. Feng Lu said, Are you suggesting it had something to do with you?" Chapter 1487 Untitled. Chapter 1487, Untitled. Feng Wu asked, "What if I told you that I was the one who got him that job?" Feng Lu said, That's the funniest joke I've ever heard." Feng Wu shrugged. "Laugh all you want then." She turned to look at Feng Yanfeng as she spoke. "Other people may not know, but uncle, surely you should know better. Do you need me to take out that I owe you?" "You?" Furious, Feng Yanfeng went pale. He didn't expect the girl to be so difficult. He then turned to the chief steward. "Since Feng Wu is already here, I believe we can hear the imperial edict now. Just get it over with and let Feng Wu be on her way," thought Feng Yanfeng angrily. However, the chief steward reminded him in an unhurried tone, "Master Feng, did you say that Feng Wu's name has been removed from your clan?" "Yes." "No." Feng Yanfeng and Feng Wu gave different answers. "Is she still a member of the clan or not?" the chief steward asked. "No," said Feng Yanfeng. "Yes," said Feng Wu. Once again, Feng Yanfeng and Feng Wu didn't agree with each other. The chief steward rubbed his forehead. "An individual's fate is connected to their clan. Who should I read this imperial edict to? The clan or Feng Wu? I can't read it if you keep disagreeing with each other." "Read it to her. Read it to her," Feng Yanfeng answered agitatedly. "Her name may still be listed in our clan, but she really can't stay here anymore. Be it reward or punishment, Feng Wu can have it all." "Are you sure?" The chief steward narrowed his eyes. "Yes. I'm positive," Feng Yanfeng said excitedly. "The imperial edict belongs to Feng Wu herself. She can have all the rewards or punishment. We don't want her good fortune, and we don't want to be incriminated by her either." Lady Wang nodded. "That's right. We don't want her rewards or to be incriminated." The rest of them all nodded. Meanwhile, because everyone was standing in front of the Feng clan's tent, they soon attracted a lot of attention. The Zhuo, Dugu, Feng, and Xian families and many others had gathered around as onlookers. Lady Wang told Mrs. Zhuo and the others, "Please be our witnesses. Feng Wu has nothing to do with the Feng clan, and she will soon be removed from this clan. She'll take full responsibility for her own mistakes, and we won't take credit for her good fortune." "Nicely said, Lady Wang. Master Feng was so miserable yesterday. If he's incriminated again, he may lose his life. This Feng Wu brings trouble to everyone around her. The Feng family has made a wise decision. After much discussion, the chief steward finally started reading the imperial edict. Feng Yanfeng was dumbfounded as soon as he heard the first sentence. In reward for her efforts in saving the Empress Dowager, Feng Wu will receive a pair of jade rui ornaments, a golden room, a manor situated at number 2, 3rd Alley, Dongyuan Avenue, and Feng Wu was rewarded for saving the Empress Dowager? Many people felt their heads spin when they heard it. They didn't know what to think. Didn't the rumor yesterday say that Feng Wu didn't go to treat the Empress Dowager, which was why Feng Yanfeng was fired? It now seemed that wasn't the case. Feng Yanfeng's eyes almost popped out when he heard the manor address. That manor was General Wei Wu's former residence. The location was wonderful and the place was huge. It was the envy of many people. Chapter 1488, Untitled. Chapter 1488, Untitled. Even Master Zhua and Master Dugu were surprised, to say nothing of Feng Yanfeng. It was especially the case with Master Dugu, who had had his eye on the manor for a long while, but Feng Wu somehow ended up taking it. The chief steward still hadn't finished reading the imperial edict. The emperor bestowed a traveling tent on Feng Wu, and a Fergana horse, and a divine bow, and all of them were great honors and could be very useful when they arrived at the Senal grassland. They were all status symbols. The Feng clan was surrounded by a lot of people, and everyone looked at Feng Wu in disbelief. Before today, they had all been criticizing Feng Wu and found her annoying because she had lost His Majesty's favor, but it had only taken Feng Wu a day to get her status back. Feng Yanfeng was so distressed that he thought his eyes were going to fall out. He looked at Feng Wu in disbelief before turning to the chief steward with an expectant look. If His Majesty had rewarded Feng Wu so generously, did that mean that he could get his job back? However, Feng Yanfeng waited and waited, but didn't hear the words he was hoping for even when the chief steward finished reading the edict. He panicked. "Sir," Feng Yanfeng stopped the chief steward, who had rolled up the imperial edict and was ready to leave, and asked, "Is that all?" "Not really." Seeing the eager look in Feng Yanfeng's eyes, the chief steward chuckled. "It's just that. Since you yourself said that Feng Wu can have all the rewards and punishments to herself, there's no need to read the part that was meant for you." "What?" Feng Yanfeng paled and was dumbfounded. For some reason, the chief steward unfolded a section of the imperial edict and let Feng Yanfeng take a peek before putting it away. Feng Yanfeng was speechless. He really was going to faint. There was indeed a reward for him in the imperial edict. Although it wasn't a ministerial position, it was good enough. It was a post as a second-ranked commanding officer at a border city. It was a job that would make a lot of people envious. Feng Yanfeng thought he was going to lose his mind. The chief steward even reminded Feng Yanfeng on his way out, "I'm going to put this second-ranked post for you on hold, Master Feng." Feng Yanfeng was still feeling dumbfounded even when the chief steward left. A second-ranked official located in a border city? That position was second only to Northern Feng General. The Junwu Empire valued martial virtues more than civil ones, so that job was almost as good as the Minister of the Ministry of Official Personnel. However, he had just lost such a wonderful opportunity. Feng Yanfeng had never regretted a decision so much. The chief steward didn't lower his voice when he said that, so everyone heard it. Right now, they were all giving Feng Yanfeng strange looks. They could still hear Feng Yanfeng in their ears, declaring that Feng Wu had nothing to do with the Feng clan, and that she could have all the rewards and punishments to herself. That was so frustrating. Feng Wu couldn't care less about Feng Yanfeng's feelings, and she left after taking the imperial edict. Feng Yanfeng wanted to say something to Feng Wu, but he hesitated. The chief steward couldn't be any more obvious with his hint. If Feng Yanfeng still wanted that job, Feng Wu was the key. While Feng Yanfeng's family was feeling distressed, Feng Wu felt very relieved. Perhaps Feng Wu's medicine was too potent, but the Empress Dowager had already woken up. Chapter 1489, Untitled. Chapter 1489, Untitled. If it were up to Emperor Wu, he would send the Empress Dowager back already. After all, it would take at least another 10 days for them to reach the Senile grassland, and the Empress Dowager wouldn't be able to handle the journey. However, the Empress Dowager wouldn't listen. She insisted that she had to go to the Senile grassland. When the old lady acted out, there was nothing Emperor Wu could do. With no other choice, Emperor Wu had to summon Feng Wu for a discussion. Feng Wu frowned. The best option right now is for Her Majesty to go back to the palace and get some rest. This is a very big deal. Emperor Wu rubbed his forehead. That's what I thought, but the Empress Dowager is bent on going to the grassland, and I can't stop her. Feng Wu gave Emperor Wu a resigned look. Of course he could stop her. He just couldn't bring himself to do so. If Her Majesty insists on going to the Senile grassland, then we'll have to worry about a lot of things for the next few days. There are so many aspects we'll have to be cautious about, both in relation to her diet and her daily life, Feng Wu said with a frown. Emperor Wu gave a wave of his hand. In that case, why don't you look after Her Majesty yourself? Feng Wu looked at Emperor Wu in resignation. Your Majesty, are you sure that Her Majesty won't flare up when she sees me, and rip open all her stitches? Emperor Wu said, well, Feng Wu said, but I'll write down some do's and don'ts so that Granny Lan can pay more attention when she's looking after Her Majesty. Along with my specially made pills, the wound will close up in 3 days. Everything should be fine then. That's great. Glad to hear that. Emperor Wu was elated. The Empress Dowager walked out from the inner room, supported by Granny Lan. Right now, a white bandage was wrapped around the Empress Dowager's head, and she had a very pale face. However, she couldn't look any more arrogant. As soon as she came out and spotted Feng Wu, she frowned. This time, she simply ignored Feng Wu and walked haughtily past her. Your Majesty! The Empress Dowager greeted Emperor Wu. Emperor Wu immediately went up to her. Mother! Master Chu was the one who had saved me from danger, wasn't he? The Empress Dowager greeted Master Chu in a benevolent manner. Master Chu glanced at Feng Wu. He knew that Feng Wu was the only reason that the old lady was able to sit here safely. She would have been dead by now. At that thought, Master Chu stepped out and said, Your Majesty, actually, the chief doctor who helped you was. Ahem. At that critical moment, Emperor Wu cleared his throat and cut Master Chu off. Master Chu gave Emperor Wu a confused look. Emperor Wu stared at him. Master Chu immediately took the hint. However, he did feel guilty for taking the credit. Hence, Master Chu looked back at Feng Wu. Feng Wu also nodded at Master Chu. That was to say, she agreed as well. Only then did Master Chu smile bitterly and said, Actually, I did make a small contribution this time, but it was mostly thanks to Your Majesty's own strength and God's blessing. The Empress Dowager was happy to hear that, and she smiled. I know I'm blessed, but your treatment was still necessary. I should thank you for that. She then glanced at Feng Wu before turning back to Master Chu. I value you because, unlike someone else, you don't think that I can't live without you. Everyone else around them fell silent. They all lowered their heads and didn't dare to look the Empress Dowager in the eye. Chapter 1490, Untitled. Chapter 1490, Untitled. As a matter of fact, the Empress Dowager really needed Feng Wu. Had it not been for her, the old lady would be in her grave now. Lady Northern Feng was also there, and she ranted the most in her head. However, since His Majesty had spoken, there was nothing she could say. The Empress Dowager threw a proud glance at Feng Wu and told Master Chu, I also like you because you don't try to take credit for other people's work, and you're not proud either, unlike someone. They act as if they call the shots around here when they didn't do a thing. Heh! Master Chu looked embarrassed. He wondered if the Empress Dowager had said that on purpose, because that description sounded just like him. Master Chu felt like crying because he was just an honest man. Your Majesty, we were only able to save you because… Ahem. Several people cleared their throat. Even Feng Wu shook her head at Master Chu. Master Chu was speechless. Her Majesty's wound has yet to close, she reminded him in an indifferent tone. She meant that if Her Majesty knew who her real lifesaver was, she might be so angry that her wound would burst open. Master Chu understood that, so he had no choice but to take the credit. The Empress Dowager glanced at Feng Wu and snorted. What do you know about my wound? As if you were the one who treated me. Feng Wu cleared her throat again. The Empress Dowager frowned. Why are you coughing all the time? Are you sick? If you infect Junjun with your coughing, I'll kill you. Feng Wu was speechless. She wanted to explain when the Empress Dowager waved her off. That's enough. I don't want to listen to you, nor do I want to see your face. Go away now. The Empress Dowager was very blunt. Empress Dugu, Jun Wuxia, and their lot were very happy to hear it, and they were thrilled to hear Feng Wu's predicament. The Northern Feng general, on the other hand, wanted to defend Feng Wu against the injustice. Feng Wu was the one who had saved the Empress Dowager, but not only didn't she get a thank you, she was scolded and taunted. How frustrating! To Lady Northern Feng's relief, after what the girl was put through, she remained unperturbed and level-headed. What a magnanimous young lady! Feng Wu didn't plan to stick around to be insulted, so she excused herself. The winter hunt was supposed to be cancelled, but since the Empress Dowager insisted on going, the journey resumed. We're still going. All the clan heads and their families were confused. They couldn't understand why the Empress Dowager still wanted to go to the Senal grassland in her current condition. Exactly what was so special about the place that the Empress Dowager just had to go there? Granny Lan had asked the Empress Dowager that question before, but she wouldn't tell even Granny Lan. For the next part of the journey, Feng Wu still stayed with Jun Linyuan as his maid. Jun Linyuan was a very fussy guy. He was extremely picky about his food. Ever since Feng Wu made the fish-flavored shredded pork with rice the other day, he had to eat what Feng Wu cooked for every single meal. Luckily, Feng Wu was already a good cook, so she was able to cook Jun Linyuan different delicious dishes every time. There were so many ingredients she could find in the mountains that she didn't have to cook the same dish for nearly 2 weeks. One night, they camped on the bank of Yueshi Lake. As soon as they got out of their carriage, Jun Linyuan saw the lake, and he told Feng Wu that he wanted roast fish. Chapter 1491. Chapter 1491, untitled, Roast Fish. Feng Wu stared at Jun Linyuan. My dear Crown Prince, we're out in the wilderness. Can you settle for something simpler? Feng Wu still had to cultivate and she was very busy. But of course, Jun Linyuan wouldn't let her go. He gave Feng Wu a proud look, crossed his hands behind his back, and marched off. What choice did Feng Wu have? She had to follow him in frustration. Luckily, it was the 15th day already. Feng Wu thought to herself, when the 18 days are over and this mission is completed, I won't be his maid anymore. The lake was filled with moonfish that would sell at a good price in the market since they were hard to catch and very rare. But for Feng Wu and Jun Linyuan, catching moonfish was a piece of cake. They didn't even need any bait. Feng Wu just sat by the water and washed her hands. She then gathered her spiritual essence into a thread and lifted a fish out of the water by pulling the thread. The moonfish was about 1/2 meter long and a silver-white color. In the moonlight, it almost looked translucent. Let's go. Feng Wu put a straw rope she had braided through the fish's mouth, took Jun Linyuan's hand, and tried to leave, because she wanted to get this over with as soon as possible. She had obtained some insight while they were traveling today, and she was looking for an opportunity to sit down and think it over. However, it was a beautiful night, and the Crown Prince obviously didn't plan to let Feng Wu go that easily. Xian Yi and Feng Sun will be here tonight, Jun Linyuan said casually as he lay down on the snow-white rock and rested his head on his crossed hands. They weren't with us before? Feng Wu was surprised. The Crown Prince glanced at Feng Wu before he turned his gaze to the sky in silence. That's right. Feng Wu rested her chin on her hands. Xianyi aside, if Feng Sun were here, he would definitely have come find us. But he didn't, not once. Yes. The Crown Prince nodded. If they're going to be here tonight, one fish indeed won't be enough. I remember that they can both eat a lot. Feng Wu caught a few more fish as she spoke. With her storage space, she could simply throw the moonfish inside. By the way, we won't see any moonfish again on our way to the Senile Grassland, will we? This was Feng Wu's first time going to the Senile Grassland, so she didn't know the terrain well. Jun Linyuan said casually, a fish is probably worth a cow there. What? Feng Wu's eyes lit up and she looked at Jun Linyuan in excitement. Really? Are you sure? Jun Linyuan grunted. That's so profitable. If that's the case, we shouldn't let these fish go to waste. One fish for a cow? Just imagine that. Feng Wu was getting excited just thinking about it. And a cow from the Senile Grassland is worth a low-grade spiritual stone in the mining area in the Central Plains. Jun Linyuan made another striking statement. Feng Wu. Although she had a spiritual stone load, all the spiritual stones beneath the Fang Manor, low and top-grade alike, went toward the formation. Feng Wu still had Chaoga, Qiuling, Uncle Qiu, and Xiaoqi to consider, and they all needed spiritual stones for their cultivation. So, these are all spiritual stones. No, I can't just watch them slip away. Her beautiful master was in her ring space. She would never put the fish in there. Chapter 1492, Untitled. Chapter 1492, Untitled. But aside from that, she still had another storage ring which Jun Linyuan had given to her before, and it was where she could keep the fish. Feng Wu crouched down and opened up the ring, and soon, moon fish started pouring into it. 1, 2, 3. 100, 1,000. In the end, Feng Wu lost count of how many there were. In short, there were a lot. Feng Wu exclaimed in surprise all of a sudden. What's that? Feng Wu snatched a moonfish out of the water and examined it curiously. There was something different about this moonfish, which was covered in a faint glow. She could detect a subtle hint of spiritual essence on it. Somehow, the fish struck her as odd, but she couldn't exactly pinpoint why. She was still trying to figure it out, when Jun Linyuan walked over and crouched down next to her. His long, slender fingers reached over and took the chubby moonfish. The Crown Prince frowned a little. Do you know what's with this fish? Feng Wu looked curiously at Jun Linyuan. Yes. He swiped his fingers across the scales of the fish, and a streak of blue light floated up. Is that spiritual essence? This moon fish contains spiritual essence? Feng Wu was confused. The moon fish doesn't have it, but if they swallow something which contains spiritual essence, they'll have it in them, Jun Linyuan said. If they've ingested spiritual essence by mistake, does that mean that there's something filled with spiritual essence in the lake? Feng Wu's eyes lit up. Jun Linyuan didn't comment. Shall I go down there and have a look? Feng Wu asked him. Before she knew it, Feng Wu had started to get into this habit. Let someone else go, Jun Linyuan said indifferently. Was there anyone else around? Feng Wu was still feeling bewildered when two figures approached them. Boss Jun, we finally caught up with you. I was so worried. Feng Sun jumped at them and tried to hug Jun Linyuan, but of course, the Crown Prince wouldn't let him. Hence, Feng Sun turned to Feng Wu instead. My dear sister. However, Jun Linyuan picked him up by the back of his collar before he could reach her. Wah! Boss Jun! Boss Jun! Let me down! Let me down! Feng Sun kicked around in the air. But, soon, Feng Wu heard the sound of something falling into the water. Turning around, she saw that poor Feng Sun had just been thrown into the lake. Feng Sun was about to go ashore, when Jun Linyuan stopped him. He said, Since you're already there, dive deeper. Feng Sun was confused. Feng Wu immediately explained to him about the moonfish. Treasure hunting had always excited Feng Sun, so he dove in head first and quickly swam around in the lake. Feng Wu was confident that Feng Sun would be able to find the source right away, but, to her surprise, after coming back up for air 3 more times, Feng Sun still couldn't find anything. Let me have a look. Xian Yi jumped in. Feng Sun and Xian Yi each covered half the lake after splitting it into quarters. That way they could do a grid search and would soon find their answer. Chapter 1493 Untitled. Chapter 1493 Untitled. As expected, in less than 15 minutes they heard from Xian Yi. He handed Feng Wu a broken stone when he came back up. I think you know what this is. Feng Sun craned his neck. Xian Yi, are you kidding me? I found quite a few of these shabby stones on my side as well, but I didn't think much of them. Xian Yi didn't reply and only watched Feng Wu quietly. Taking the broken stone, it only took Feng Wu one look to realize what it was. This is a spiritual stone used in a formation. It's just that it's drained of spiritual essence, so it looks the same as any common stone. Feng Wu rose to her feet and studied the lake with a cold look in her eyes. She didn't expect to find a formation in the lake. Judging from what was left of the spiritual stones, this was no ordinary formation. I'll go have a look. Feng Wu jumped into the lake after saying those words. She swam as nimbly as a fish in the lake, and before long, she arrived at the spot where Xian Yi found the stone. Grotesque stones and red coral of various shapes covered the bottom of the lake. Feng Wu was very level-headed for her age. We'll search the area around this spot. We're looking for some spiritual stones. I need a baseline spiritual stone to deduce the type of formation used here. Feng Sun and Xian Yi were both influential young lords who usually didn't take orders from anyone but Jun Linyuan. But before they knew it, they had started to believe everything Feng Wu said. With their help, Feng Wu soon discovered the pattern of the spiritual stones, and with that pattern, she was able to deduce the type of formation used. It's a level 5 formation. That's incredible. Feng Wu started looking for the core of the formation as she spoke. Because she had found the general direction, the search wasn't difficult at all. Feng Wu was in the front with Feng Sun on her left and Xian Yi on her right. The three of them formed a triangle. A few times, Feng Sun thought that they hit a dead end when there was nothing in front of them but a wall of red coral. However, Feng Wu could somehow always lead them through it at an impossible angle. No wonder this secret had been hidden under the lake for so many years. If one didn't understand formations, they wouldn't know where to look. We're here. They were passing under the archway of a bridge when Feng Wu said that. The scene they saw was quite impressive once they were on the other side of the archway. They thought they had arrived in hell. They were looking at a treasure ship. After years at the bottom of the lake, the ship was very dilapidated. There was some cargo on the ship, but there were more dead bodies. Some lay face down, some on their backs, and some had been impaled on poles. It was a horrible scene. It's a shipwreck. Feng Sun was the first to rush toward it. However, stop! Feng Wu stopped him. Luckily, Feng Sun always listened to Feng Wu, so he stopped at her command. He turned around and looked at Feng Wu in bewilderment. Feng Wu said grumpily, "Did you think that shipwrecks wouldn't have traps on them?" She then threw a stone at the ship. It hit the ship and suddenly, squeak, there was a terrifying sound. Before Feng Sun realized what was going on, Feng Wu was already dragging him back. Chapter 1494, Untitled. Chapter 1494, Untitled. They had only just hidden behind a wall when they heard the sound of shooting arrows. The water should have hindered the arrows' movements, but it seemed that these arrows were able to overcome that resistance, and the impact they made resembled an explosion. It was terrifying. Whoosh! They just kept coming. Luckily, Feng Wu reacted in time. Otherwise, Feng Sun would have been injured, rushing out like that. Still shaken from the lingering fear, he looked at Feng Wu and heaved a sigh of relief. That was close. If you didn't drag me away, I would have turned into a hedgehog by now. Feng Wu chuckled. No, you won't. You would just have a few painful injuries. Nevertheless, those are some very malicious arrows. They only boarded the shipwreck after it was all over. Hey, why are most of these dead people from the grassland? Feng Sun examined the corpses curiously. The flesh had rotted away years ago, but they could still see that the dead people were descendants of the grassland from the bones. Xian Yi said grumpily, grassland or not, it has nothing to do with us. Let's go find the thing. Feng Sun agreed. Compared with this discovery, they preferred the thrill of the treasure hunt. I think someone beat us to it and took everything valuable. Feng Sun and Xian Yi looked around and spoke in a sorry tone after they came back out. Is there nothing left? Feng Wu frowned. No. Feng Sun sounded resigned. He had expected to find some treasure after they finally disabled the formation, but the ship had only turned out to be a shell. Feng Wu scratched her head. That shouldn't be the case. Did someone get here before us? She wouldn't believe it, so she went in to search herself. Feng Sun followed her and discouraged her as she looked around. I told you already, there's nothing left. But you won't believe me and just have to look for yourself. You were so excited, but you're going to be disappointed. The cabin was utterly empty, as though someone had taken absolutely everything. While Feng Sun was sighing and moaning, Feng Wu was tapping on the walls with her fingers. Feng Sun looked at Feng Wu in resignation. He had told her that there was nothing here. Did she think she could find something by tapping? But to Feng Sun's surprise, after 3 long and 5 short taps, crackle, there was the sound of cracking wood. Feng Sun's eyes widened as he watched a medium-sized sealed box fall out of the wall. That! He stared at Feng Wu in bewilderment. How did you find it? Feng Wu said innocently, I just tapped randomly and it fell out. Feng Sun. It had obviously been hidden so well that the first group of people who got here hadn't found this hidden treasure box. What's inside? Feng Sun was curious. Feng Wu said, We'll have a look once we're up on shore, since we have to leave now. Feng Sun was confused. Why? Feng Wu said, Because the self-destruct mode was activated after this box fell out. This treasure ship will explode in less than a minute. Chapter 1495. Chapter 1495, Untitled. What? Hearing that, Feng Sun grabbed Feng Wu and dashed off. Let's go. This is a formidable treasure ship, and we don't know how much of an impact the explosion will have. Just move as fast as you can. Feng Wu, Feng Sun, and Xian Yi quickly left the bottom of the lake. The 3 of them had just climbed out of the lake when, whoosh, a formidable shock wave struck them from behind, and it was terrifying. Waves shot up and exploded in the air. Thump! The impact threw the 3 of them onto the bank. Luckily, Jun Linyuan had activated a protective skill before they hit the ground. Feng Wu opened her eyes to find herself already in Jun Linyuan's arms. That terrifying shockwave had been extinguished by Jun Linyuan's strike. Feng Wu was speechless. Even so, the water level was still rising quickly. Water is going to get up here soon. Let's go. Still carrying Feng Wu in his arms, Jun Linyuan ran back to the campsite. Feng Sun and Xian Yi followed him. It was a long distance for normal people, but to Jun Linyuan, it was only a matter of a few leaps. Jun Linyuan told Feng when they got back, "A flood is coming. Let's move up the hill." Everyone was dumbfounded. Why was there suddenly a flood? No one would believe it if it had come from someone else, but since it was Jun Linyuan who said it, no one questioned it. The carriages started moving again and were soon halfway up the hill. Just then, the water from the lake arrived. Everyone looked at Jun Linyuan in amazement. That was so impressive! How incredible! Jun Linyuan ignored them all. Instead, he carried Feng Wu back to their carriage. Feng Wu was still holding the box she found at the bottom of the lake, and she only opened it happily when they got back to the carriage. Feng Sun and Xian Yi gathered around and watched curiously. "What's inside? I'm so curious," Feng Sun said expectantly. Feng Wu said, "It was so well hidden. I think it's some sort of top secret." The box was made from hard iron from the bottom of the ocean with a password consisting of formation code. If one tried to pry it open by force, the box would destroy itself. That was to say, no one would know what was inside. Luckily, Feng Wu knew formations, and less than a handful of people in the entire Junwu Empire were better at her in them. With some deduction, she was able to solve the password in less than 5 minutes. With a click, the wondrous box opened. The first item, it was a messenger bottle. Feng Sun didn't open it right away, and only looked at Feng Wu. Feng Wu was amused, and she chuckled. "It's okay. There's no trap. Just open it." Feng Sun only opened the bottle after hearing Feng Wu's confirmation. "Hey, what's this?" Feng Sun took a light yellow parchment out of the bottle. On it was an illustration of mountains and rivers with notes written in a foreign language. "Hey, isn't that the language of Sinal? And isn't that Sheep Grass Mountain?" Feng Sun cried out. Feng Wu looked at him in confusion. Chapter 1496, Untitled. Chapter 1496, Untitled. Feng Sun couldn't hold back his excitement. "That's a treasure map, isn't it? Am I right?" Feng Sun showed it to Jun Linyuan as he spoke. Jun Linyuan glanced at him and gave a slight nod. That immediately settled Feng Sun's mind, and he said excitedly, "So, that's a real treasure map?" He looked at Jun Linyuan with twinkling eyes as he spoke. Jun Linyuan nodded again. "And the treasure belongs to the royal family of Sinal." Holy crap! Feng Sun was so excited that he almost jumped up. The grassland was a region, and the Sinal grassland was the most wealthy of them all. If they could obtain the treasure of the royal family, that would be. Even Feng Wu was thrilled, let alone Feng Sun. This would be so much more profitable than selling moonfish. And, is there more? Feng Sun asked anxiously. Feng Wu took a second object out of the box. It was a booklet. Technically, it was a notebook. Feng Wu opened it and saw that it was the record of a solitary trip. This booklet belonged to someone called Malmo, who wrote all this. After turning a few pages, Feng Wu saw that it was all written in the Sinal language, which gave her a headache, so she gave the booklet back to Feng Sun. Malmo? Feng Sun was utterly surprised. I've heard that name before. If I remember correctly, he was the previous crown prince, and should have become the king. Really? Feng Wu raised an eyebrow. Have we discovered some sort of secret of the royal family? That's okay. We'll have a closer look later. Putting the booklet aside, Feng Wu took out the third object. It was a jade slip. Feng Wu cried out softly when she injected her spiritual essence into the jade slip. Immediately, all eyes were on her. Feng Wu said, "It contains a cultivation technique known as Nirvana of Omen." Feng Sun was surprised. Nirvana of Omen? Are you sure? Is it really Nirvana of Omen? Feng Wu looked at Feng Sun in bewilderment. Have you heard of this technique before? Feng Sun said, Of course I have. That's the most superior cultivation technique in the grassland, and only the royal family can access it. Moreover, it's only for the most promising members. If I remember correctly, after this slip was lost, so was the cultivation technique. Feng Sun then smacked his own thigh. Only those with the grassland bloodline can learn it, so it doesn't mean much to us. But don't worry. With it, we'll be able to get a lot of things. Ha ha. Feng Sun was so excited that he prompted Feng Wu, and? Is there more? Take it out, quickly. Feng Wu waved him off grumpily. There's also a dagger, and it looks a bit old. Oh God. That has to be Malmo's personal dagger. It has to be. Little Feng Wu. You're awesome. Feng Sun patted her arm in excitement. You know what? The objects in the box may not seem like much, but if we make good use of them, we can turn the senile grassland upside down if we want. You're our lucky star. Feng Sun patted Feng Wu on the back. Chapter 1497 Untitled. Chapter 1497 Untitled. He only realized that he had patted her too hard when Jun Linyuan threw a dirty look at him. Ha ha ha, Xiao Wu, are you alright? Seeing the way the girl stumbled under his patting, Feng Sun scratched his head, looking ashamed. Feng Wu waved at him. That's alright. You guys enjoy your chat. I'm hungry. I'll go roast you some fish. Those moonfish couldn't go to waste. They were at the best location halfway up the hill. Feng Wu chose the best spot and had Feng Sun set up the grill for her. Moonfish didn't have a single scale and were very easy to clean. After removing the entrails and rinsing the fish, Feng Wu made 3 cuts on each fish, used some ginger to get rid of the fishy smell, and seasoned them with a special concoction she made herself. Meanwhile, she also stuffed the fish with spices that she had gathered during the trip. Once everyone was given their tasks, Feng Sun started setting up the grill while Xian Yi went to find some firewood. Because they were out in the open, the other people were able to see everything they were doing. Families like the Zhuo family were especially shocked when they saw the way Feng Wu ordered Feng Sun and Xian Yi around. How was that even possible? What magic did Feng Wu have? Why did influential young lords like Feng Sun and Xian Yi get along so well with her? The harmonious scene stung many eyes and broke many hearts. Seeing that the moonfish was properly seasoned, Feng Wu came out of the tent and took over the job. I'm starving. Feng Sun patted his stomach and looked resentful. Feng Wu patted his head the way one would pacify a puppy dog. There. It's almost done. Just another 15 minutes. Alright. I'll just sit here and wait. Feng Sun sat down cross-legged and rested his chin on his hands. The way he blinked looked quite adorable. That was how Feng Wu and Feng Sun interacted with each other on a daily basis, but to other people that was the most incredible thing. Why is young Lord Feng so obedient with Feng Wu? And young Lord Xian as well. Feng Wu is just a bed-warming maid. How does she do it? The entourage this time was quite sizable, and there were high-ranking officials, first-ranked dames, princes and princesses of all sorts. They were all arrogant people that used to look down on Feng Wu. But now they suddenly realized that Feng Wu was so important to Feng Sun and Xian Yi, which utterly confused them. They were so overwhelmed with jealousy that they had no time to analyze it. All they knew were their jealous feelings. Feng Wu didn't know what the others were thinking, but even if she did, she wouldn't care at all. She mulled over her cultivation technique as she busied herself with roasting the fish. She had mastered the 3 stances her beautiful master taught her, but she still didn't know where she could find the 4th one. Her master had disappeared so suddenly that she probably had to wait until he woke up to learn the 4th stance. Feng Wu patted her own head in frustration. She was only on the 6th mission of the 12 Trials of Love, and the 6th one had been extended. She couldn't imagine how torturous the future ones would be. As she skillfully coated the roast fish with sauce, she racked her brain and tried to predict what might happen next and what precautions she would have to take. Chapter 1498, Untitled. Chapter 1498, Untitled. Although she was absent-minded, the fish turned out excellent. The Empress Dowager, Emperor Wu, and Jun Linyuan were the core of the convoy, so the three of them weren't so far apart. As soon as the fish was ready, the aroma filled the air. The Empress Dowager just happened to be downwind, so the intense scent drifted her way. "That smells so nice." Feng Sun was so intrigued by the aroma that his mouth watered. Feng Wu was already an excellent cook to begin with. The moon fish was naturally tasty, and Feng Wu had used a tiny formation to gather spiritual essence when she was cooking. As a result, Xiao Wu, Feng Sun blinked at Feng Wu. His big, sparkling eyes could melt one's heart. Feng Wu only gave him a grumpy look and rubbed his head. "Wait. All right." Feng Sun looked as pitiful as a puppy dog. Just then, he sensed a cold glance aimed at him. A chill ran up his legs, and his back stiffened. Turning his head involuntarily, he saw. The Crown Prince was glaring at him with eyes so cold that they could freeze the air. "Sss." Feng Sun drew in his breath. He detected jealousy. Boss Jun was jealous. At that thought, Feng Sun immediately moved away. Feng Wu had just torn off a palm-sized piece of fish, and was handing it to Feng Sun when he moved away. He didn't even get to his feet when he jumped back. Feng Wu was surprised. "What?" Looking around, Feng Sun saw that he was no longer being stared at. When he looked again, he saw that Boss Jun was no longer there. "Haha, it's nothing. I was mistaken." Feng Sun and Xian Yi were travel-worn and weary from their long journey here. They didn't even have time to rest on their way, let alone feed themselves. By now, they were so hungry that they thought they were going to pass out. "Aren't you hungry? Take it." Feng Wu wrapped a green lotus leaf around the roast fish and handed it to Feng Sun. Feng Sun took it and breathed in deeply. That aroma was insane. Without thinking, he stuffed it into his mouth. Wow! It tasted even better than it smelled. It was maddening. That was so delicious. "Wow! That tastes great. Xiao Wu, you're such an amazing cook." Feng Sun's words were muffled with all the fish in his mouth, but one could tell what he wanted to say from his sparkling eyes. Xian Yi was also eating, but he wasn't wolfing it down like Feng Sun. He was much more civilized. He might eat like a refined man, but he wasn't slower than Feng Sun by any means. Feng Sun and Xian Yi finished their portions in less than 3 seconds, and they involuntarily turned their heads toward Feng Wu. She was still holding a moonfish about half a meter long. "Xiao Wu," Feng Sun cried out, and the next second, he jumped at Feng Wu. Feng Wu said grumpily, "Don't get too excited. I'll give it to you." However, Feng Sun didn't get it in the end, because Xian Yi got there first. "Damn it! Xian Yi! How can you do that? I didn't know you were that type of person." Feng Sun was exasperated. That man was so mean. Chapter 1499, Untitled. Chapter 1499, Untitled. Xian Yi chuckled. "The devil takes the hindmost. Blame yourself for being too slow. Give me back my roast fish." Feng Sun stomped his foot in frustration. Xian Yi had gone through all the trouble to get it, so of course he wouldn't give it back. Feng Sun jumped at him in frustration, but Xian Yi knew Feng Sun too well to let him get what he wanted. Before Feng Sun could get to him, Xian Yi was already running away. "Xian the Second, stop right there." Feng Sun stomped his foot and ran after him as fast as he could. Of course Xian Yi wasn't going to stop. Holding the fish, he dashed off, while Feng Sun chased after him at top speed. There was only so much space in the campsite, and they weren't exactly trying to keep their voices down, so they disturbed the others. Right now, a lot of eyes were on them. Most of the men were staying outside, while the women were in the tents, but if one looked closely, they could see that the door curtains had been lifted slightly. The Zwa family. Mrs. Zwa and Mrs. Dugu were still together. They were already sister-in-laws, and with their common enemy, the two of them were especially close at the moment. They were still talking about how to deal with Feng Wu when they smelled the incredible aroma. Before they knew it, they heard the hubbub outside. "What's that about?" Mrs. Zwa asked curiously. Mrs. Zwa's chambermaid was called Yufurong, and she had a mild temper and smiled all the time. She said merrily, "I'll go have a look." She soon came back with a strange look on her face. The two ladies darted curious looks at her, and Mrs. Zwa frowned. "What's that about?" Yufurong stopped smiling and said quietly, "It's young Lord Feng and young Lord Xian. Xian Yi and Feng Sun? They usually behave themselves. Why are they making all that noise now? What's going on?" Both ladies had their eyes on Xian Yi and Feng Sun. As a matter of fact, they weren't the only ones. All families in the imperial capital with teenage daughters had their eyes on the two young lords. Because they were the most ideal future husbands, second only to Jun Linyuan. Feng Sun and Xian Yi were both promising enough to win the hearts of the mothers. Xian Yi and Feng Sun? What happened? Are they having a row with someone? Mrs. Zwa asked with a frown. Zwa Qinghuan wasn't her only daughter. There was also Zwa Qingyu. Mrs. Dugu also had 3 daughters. Yufurong smiled wryly. Young Lord Xian and Feng are fighting each other. What? Aren't they good friends? They're like brothers. Why would they break into a fight? Just then, they heard someone shouting outside. Xian Yi! Stop right there. Do it, or I'm gonna kill you. Feng Sun sounded as if he had lost his mind. Xian Yi was being very naughty. He stuffed the fish into his mouth as he ran. Feng Sun couldn't see it from behind, but when they reached a corner, he saw everything. Hey! Xian Yi! How dare you eat it without my permission? Put that fish down right now. Feng Sun had only tried such good roast fish once in his life, but someone else had stolen it before he could have another bite. Xian Yi looked over his shoulder with a resigned expression. Is that all you can do? Shout at me? Chapter 1500 Untitled. Chapter 1500 Untitled. Feng Sun asked, "What else? Give me a hint." Xian Yi didn't have time for that. He took a large bite of the fish, chewed, and did it all over again. The others were all astonished when they saw the way the two of them ran around. The ladies were utterly surprised when Yufurong told them about it. What? Young Lord Feng and young Lord Xian are fighting over a roast fish? Mrs. Zwa couldn't believe her ears. But Yufurong nodded with a bitter smile. That's right, everyone heard it. Young Lord Feng is already running very fast, but he can't catch up with young Lord Xian. Mrs. Zwa looked shocked. What's going on? It's as if the young lord has never tasted roast fish before. But it does smell nice, and even my mouth is watering. Mrs. Dugu told the old maid next to her. Go find out who made that fish and have them cook one for me. Quickly. Granny Yi was about to go, when Yufurong stopped her. She smiled wryly. Granny Yi, please don't go. You won't be able to get it. What now? Mrs. Dugu was bewildered. As the family of Empress Dugu, the Dugu family was one of the most influential families in the empire that everyone thought highly of. Why would anyone say no to such a family? Mrs. Dugu smirked. But that fish was cooked by Miss Feng Wu herself. Yufurong smiled bitterly. Miss Feng Wu. A hush fell over the crowd as soon as she said that name. She's just all over the place. Mrs. Dugu snorted. She didn't try to hide her disdain. Mrs. Zwa sounded discontent as well and said sarcastically, What's going on with the Feng clan? Why is that girl so good at seducing men? It was obvious that the two ladies were jealous because they had daughters as well, and they could never get along well with Feng Sun and Xian Yi. While the two ladies were secretly tormented by their jealousy, the Empress Dowager, because she had insisted on going to the senile grassland, the Empress Dowager had to be on a strict diet imposed by Feng Wu. The instructions were quite simple. The food had to be low in oil, salt, and sugar, and the Empress Dowager was already getting sick of it. If she knew that Feng Wu had come up with that regime, she would probably hate her even more. She was lying in bed and whining about her pain when she smelled the aroma of food from outside. It was such a unique smell that she didn't think she had ever smelled it before. One could only imagine how someone who was about to pass out from starvation would feel when they smelled the spicy aroma. The old lady swallowed with difficulty. She was about to ask Granny Lon about it, when she heard footsteps outside. "Your Majesty, Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhuo are here to see you. Do you feel well enough to see them?" Granny Lon asked. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhuo? Had they come with the food that was giving off that nice aroma? The Empress Dowager was elated by that thought. She sprang up from the bed and cried out, "Quickly! Invite them in!" How thoughtful of them! The Empress Dowager thought to herself. Invite them in? Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhuo exchanged surprised looks. Chapter 1501 Untitled. Chapter 1501 Untitled. The Empress Dowager wasn't exactly nice toward them. To be more precise, the Empress Dowager was quite nonchalant toward everyone except for Jun Linyuan. "Your Majesty!" Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhuo knelt down to pay their respects. The Empress Dowager was excited at first, but her face darkened when she saw that they had come here empty-handed. The two ladies could sense the change in her mood, but they had no idea what was going on. "What are you here for?" The Empress Dowager stared at them. Mrs. Dugu smiled and said, "Your Majesty, we just thought we should visit you. Are you feeling better?" The Empress Dowager snorted. "How much better can I get? What's there to see?" Mrs. Dugu looked rather embarrassed when she heard that. Just then, Granny Lon came in with a food tray. The Empress Dowager looked even more displeased when she saw it, and her face was very dark now. Seeing the way the old lady frowned like a child, Granny Lon smiled wryly. "Your Majesty, I've brought you your meal." She then opened the food boxes and set the table. The boxes contained all kinds of boiled vegetables and fruit with no added sugar, salt, or oil. It was rather unappetizing. The Empress Dowager already had to put up with the diet for half a month and had reached her limit. "Take it away. I'm not eating it. Never." The Empress Dowager threw a tantrum like a child. Granny Lon smiled bitterly. "Your Majesty, you said it yourself. This diet is doing great things for your recovery. Plus, your diet can go back to normal in a few days. Please bear with it for a bit longer." The Empress Dowager glared at Granny Lon and pushed the tray away. She then said angrily, "I've been eating it for over 2 weeks. That's how long it's been. One more bite and I'll throw up. Take them away. I'd rather starve to death." Granny Lon smiled wryly. The Empress Dowager hadn't been able to move around a few days ago, so she didn't have much appetite and didn't eat much. However, as she got better and her taste buds started working again, it was getting harder and harder to get her to eat. "But, take them away. Right now." "But, did you not hear me?" With her unfulfilled appetite, the Empress Dowager was very grumpy. The two ladies exchanged looks, and Mrs. Zhuo was the first to figure it out. She then came up with a plan. She frowned at Granny Lon and said, "Granny Lon, is that what you've been feeding Her Majesty? How dare you?" Feeling wronged, Granny Lon looked at Mrs. Zhuo in resignation. "My lady, here's the thing. Her Majesty fell sick earlier, and this diet was set by the physician. It'll help Her Majesty with her recovery." Mrs. Zhuo rolled up her sleeves. "Really? By a physician? Which one?" I'd like to ask them why they would abuse Her Majesty like this." Hearing that someone was on her side, the old lady immediately regarded Mrs. Zwa as her new best friend. Taking Mrs. Zwa's hand, she turned around and glared at Granny Lon. "That's right. Which physician gave you that instruction? Bring him here. I'd like to know why he's abusing me like this and if he has a death wish." Granny Lon felt so awkward. Chapter 1502. It was her. Chapter 1502. It was her. Because the Empress Dowager didn't like Feng Wu, no one had told her that Feng Wu was her savior to begin with, and that this diet was her design as well. Was it Master Chu? I ran into him on my way here, but he didn't say anything about the diet. Mrs. Zwa was smirking inwardly. She knew what everyone was trying to hide and what the Empress Dowager hated. If the news had to come out eventually, why not now? Granny Lon said, "Well." She darted a warning glance at Mrs. Zwa, hoping that she wouldn't create more trouble. However, Mrs. Zwa had made up her mind, and Granny Lon just wasn't important enough to stop her. The Empress Dowager frowned. "Didn't Master Chu prescribe this diet?" Granny Lon said, "Well." Seeing the way Granny Lon stammered, the Empress Dowager immediately saw what was going on. She grabbed Granny Lon and stared at her with cold, sharp eyes. She said, "Granny Lon, you've worked in the palace all your life. You grew up with me, entered the palace with me, and you were there the entire time until I became who I am. But now you're keeping things from me? Speak. What's this about?" Once the Empress Dowager saw what was going on, it wasn't that easy to fool her anymore. Seeing that things were getting out of hand, Granny Lon shot warning glances at the young maids outside so that they could inform Emperor Wu. However, the two ladies had also come with maids, and they were doing everything they could stop the young maid. Hence, "Do you want me to kill you with my own hands?" The Empress Dowager stared at Granny Lon with eyes that could spit fire. After eating food without salt, sugar, or oil for over 2 weeks, the Empress Dowager was on the verge of breaking down. Sighing inwardly, Granny Lon said sorry to Feng Wu in her head and, "Your Majesty, please don't get excited. Can you sit down and hear me out?" Having served the Empress Dowager for so many years, Granny Lon was able to calm the Empress Dowager down with a few sentences and made her sit down. "Tell me now." The Empress Dowager glowered. Granny Lon crouched down in front of the Empress Dowager, held her hands, and looked into her eyes. She said, "Your Majesty, we didn't mean to keep it from you, but because of your condition earlier, we decided to keep you in the dark for the time being, but we didn't mean to. Your health is always our priority." The Empress Dowager wasn't as angry when she heard that. She snorted with a stern look on her face. "Speak." Granny Lon smiled bitterly. "Your condition was so severe 2 weeks ago that your life was hanging in the balance, but Master Chu, he had no confidence in curing your Majesty at all." "What?" The Empress Dowager stared at Granny Lon. "It wasn't Master Chu who saved me." Granny Lon kept her gaze on the Empress Dowager and nodded solemnly. "It wasn't him? That's impossible." The Empress Dowager was dumbfounded. "Master Chu is the most capable imperial physician in the convoy this time. If he couldn't help me, who did it in the end?" All of a sudden, an idea struck her. And the idea astonished her. She looked like she had been struck by lightning. It was her? Chapter 1503 Untitled. Chapter 1503 Untitled. The Empress Dowager was completely dumbfounded. Taking the Empress Dowager's hands, Granny Lon looked solemnly into her eyes. "Your Majesty, we all know that you don't like her, nor would you accept her treatment, but it was very urgent." "How dare you?" "How?" The Empress Dowager threw Granny Lan's hands off and glared at her. "You people know perfectly well how much I dislike her, but you still did it." Damn you all! She was so infuriated that she saw stars. She stumbled and almost fainted. Your Majesty! Everyone cried out in astonishment. Granny Lon caught the old lady in time. Go get the doctor, now, she said hastily. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa exchanged awkward looks. Only then did they start feeling scared. If something really happened to the Empress Dowager, His Majesty would definitely punish them for it. Master Chu's tent was only a short distance away, so he arrived in no time. He frowned after examining the Empress Dowager and said, Her Majesty was just too angry, hence the episode. Luckily, we still have the dragonwood fiber powder from Miss Feng Wu. Otherwise, I can't imagine what could have happened. After that, Master Chu took a bottle out of his sleeve, unplugged it, and gave Granny Lon instructions. Fill a small bowl with some warm water, melt a spoon of the powder in it, and feed it to Her Majesty. Granny Lon hesitated. Master Chu prompted her, Do it now. Otherwise, Her Majesty's health may be damaged. Granny Lon took a deep breath, glanced at the two ladies, and remained silent. The two ladies suddenly had a bad feeling, and Mrs. Zwa was acutely aware of it, so she suggested that they leave. Hasty footsteps came from outside, and Emperor Wu rushed into the room at that moment. How's Her Majesty doing? Emperor Wu looked concerned. Master Chu then told Emperor Wu the diagnosis. It was because of anger? Emperor Wu's darkened even more. How did that happen? Why was Her Majesty angry? Who did that to her? Granny Lon stared at Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa. Mrs. Zwa's survival instinct kicked in, and she immediately realized that Granny Lon was going to tell the truth, so she spoke first. Your Majesty, Her Majesty was mad at Miss Feng Wu, because she learned that Feng Wu was her doctor. It was nicely done, and Emperor Wu was immediately angry at Feng Wu. Get Feng Wu here. Your Majesty. Just then, Granny Lon calmly interjected. She bowed at Emperor Wu and spoke in an unperturbed tone. Her Majesty didn't know at first. The two ladies glared at Granny Lon. How dare you? However, they had underestimated Granny Lan's aplomb and courage. Keeping her gaze on Emperor Wu, Granny Lon said, Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. will work together to reveal the truth to Her Majesty, which was why Her Majesty fainted in an infuriated state. Emperor Wu stared at Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa with cold, murderous eyes. He looked like he was ready to kill someone, because he had made it very clear that no one was to reveal the truth to the Empress Dowager. But these two people. Your Majesty, please forgive us. Frightened, Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa dropped to their knees and trembled from head to toe. Chapter 1504, Untitled. Chapter 1504, Untitled. How dare the two of you? Emperor Wu was furious. This is unacceptable. Your Majesty, please forgive us. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa pounded their foreheads on the floor. After what you did, do you actually expect me to forgive you? In your dreams. Emperor Wu had been very frustrated to begin with, and he just vented all at once. Take them out and flog them 20 times each. Emperor Wu gave the order. What? Everyone was dumbfounded. So were Mrs. Zwa and Mrs. Dugu. They couldn't believe their ears. The emperor usually only punished his officials, and the punishment hardly ever extended to their family members, let alone was anything as humiliating as flogging. Because those who were flogged would have their pants removed so that their lower torsos were naked. No! Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa went pale in fright and almost fainted. If they really were flogged, they would lose their dignity for good. No, please don't. Your Majesty, please forgive us. Please. Mrs. Zwa wrapped her arms around Emperor Wu's thigh and whimpered. Your Majesty, please forgive us. Please. We'll never do it again. It was all our fault. That punishment was simply unimaginable. Empress Dugu had arrived, and her face was very dark as well. Mrs. Dugu was her sister-in-law, and Mrs. Zwa was her sister. If these two women were flogged, Empress Dugu would be humiliated as well. Your Majesty, please don't be mad. Empress Dugu pleaded for the two women. She reasoned with him, laid out all the facts, and tried to persuade him as tears ran down her cheeks. Your Majesty, please don't flog them. Even if Your Majesty has to flog someone, it shouldn't be them. Please consider their dignity. Emperor Wu calmed down slightly, but it wasn't enough to appease him. He said, They can't be flogged? Great. Get Zwa Ming and Dugu Wangwa here and flog them 50 times each. Now. What? Everyone was dumbfounded. What? Why? Your Majesty, please don't. Mrs. Zwa felt desperate. If Zwa Ming knew that she was the reason he was going to be flogged, he would hate her. Mrs. Dugu thought the same. However, Emperor Wu had made up his mind, and he wasn't going to cut them loose. Poor Master Zwa and Master Dugu. Right now, they were standing there with hands behind their backs as they watched Feng Wu banter with Feng Sun and Xian Yi. Master Zwa said in a contemptuous tone, This Feng Wu is such a superficial and restless girl. No wonder Brother Feng doesn't like her. She's such a troublemaker. Master Dugu nodded. That's right. A daughter like that is bound to bring trouble to a family. Master Zwa said, One should always marry a woman for her virtue, such as our wives. With a good wife, for the next 3 generations. However, an army marched toward them before he could finish. It was led by the chief steward. Sir, where are you heading? The chief steward was quite a respected figure, and even someone like Zwa Ming would treat him appropriately. However, the chief steward had a very stern look on his face, which was very rare, because he always had a smile. Behind him, the army looked very aggressive. Are those His Majesty's Imperial Guards? What's going on? Is there an assassin? Master Dugu was perplexed. Chapter 1505, Untitled. Chapter 1505, Untitled. The chief steward smiled slightly. No, there's no assassin. But my lords, the two of you are in trouble. Seeing the aggressive looks in the guard's eyes, Master Zwa felt his stomach turn. What do you mean? Master Zwa's voice trembled. The chief steward took out his token of authority and gave a wave of his hand. Take them down. Huh. Master Zwa and Master Dugu were both dumbfounded. The Imperial Guards only took orders from the people who held Emperor Wu's token, and ignored everyone else. Immediately, 4 stalwart men stepped out of the team and charged at the 2 masters. Sir, what's this about? Zwa Ming glared at the chief steward. It was quite a scene. After all, Master Zwa and Master Dugu were getting arrested. With their official status, it was quite a terrifying thing to witness. Hence, all eyes turned their way. Even Feng Wu and Feng Sun, who had been messing around, looked this way with smiles on their faces. The chief steward raised his token and said, Fetch a bench, pin them down on it, and flog them 50 times each. OMG. The others were still hoping that the chief steward was only joking. But what was happening was so real that they didn't know how to react. Zwa Ming yelled, This has to be a mistake. Sir, please let me explain. However, the chief steward looked very stern and was as grave as a judge. Flog them. Now. Now that he had finally gotten the chance, of course the chief steward would make sure that they paid the price. The guards all had aggressive and murderous looks in their eyes, and they were incredibly strong. No matter how Master Zwa and Master Dugu struggled, they were pinned down like helpless chickens. Flog them now. This is His Majesty's order. The chief steward brought up the emperor. Master Dugu and Master Zwa felt like crying. They had no idea what this was about. The others all watched in astonishment. 2 high-ranking officials were being flogged in front of everyone, which was so humiliating. What a disgrace! Mrs. Zwa and Mrs. Dugu had been released, and they almost broke down when they saw their husbands getting punished from a short distance away. "Sister-in-law, what are we going to do now?" Mrs. Zwa was almost in tears. Mrs. Dugu was equally distressed. If their husbands knew that they had to go through this all because their wives had said too much, it would be a disaster. Their husbands would probably hate them forever. "Sister, don't say a word. We're going to take this secret to the grave without telling another soul. Remember?" Mrs. Dugu stared at Mrs. Zwa. Mrs. Zwa nodded as she cried. They couldn't bring themselves to watch anymore, because they were worried that their guilt would give them away if they stayed any longer. "Why? Even if you have to kill me, we still deserve an answer. Sir, why is this happening? What did we do?" The chief steward smirked. "You didn't do anything wrong except marry the wrong women. Ask them when you get back home." After the flogging, both Master Dugu and Master Zwa were too weak to even stand up, so the chief steward had someone carry them back. "Go back to whatever you were doing." The crowd scattered, but the gossip wouldn't go away that easily. Chapter 1506, Untitled. Chapter 1506, Untitled. Everyone was intrigued by the chief steward's words. They had married the wrong women. So, was it Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa's fault? While the men were being flogged, Feng Wu was still roasting fish. She listened to what was going on as she unhurriedly roasted the fish, as if it was nothing out of the ordinary. Feng Sun said, "Hey, little Feng Wu, Master Zwa and Master Dugu are getting flogged. Aren't you a little bit curious?" Feng Wu asked, "About what?" Feng Sun said, "Don't you want to know why they're being punished?" Feng Wu nodded. Feng Sun grinned, flashing his perfectly white teeth. "Little Feng Wu, you do want to know, don't you?" Feng Wu didn't say a word. Crossing his hands behind his back and raising his chin, Feng Sun gloated. "Beg me now, and I'll go ask around for you. I'm very good at gathering information, and I can always get the information I want." Feng Wu said, "I know." Feng Sun stared at her. "What do you know?" Feng Wu gave him a "you idiot" look. "I know why Master Zwa and Master Dugu are being punished." "You know? How? What do you know?" Feng Sun asked. Feng Wu said in resignation, "How can I not know? Didn't the chief steward tell us already? He said that they were suffering because of their wives." Feng Sun said, "Yes, the chief steward did say that, but that was all. He didn't say anything else." Feng Wu said, "Are you an idiot? The chief steward might have only said that, but the meaning behind it is very obvious. All you need is some simple deduction." Feng Sun asked, "What do you think, then?" Feng Wu said, "It's simple. Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zwa upset Her Majesty to the point that she passed out from her rage. His Majesty was so furious that he wanted to flog Mrs. Zwa and Mrs. Dugu, but Empress Dugu begged for His Majesty's forgiveness, so the husbands got flogged instead." Feng Wu's reasoning was well-rounded and clear, which dumbfounded Feng Sun. You got all that from the chief steward's one sentence?" If that was true, Feng Wu had to be clairvoyant. Feng Wu chuckled. "You believe that?" Feng Sun said, "Huh." Feng Wu said, "Master Chu was worried that he would do something wrong and aggravate Her Majesty's condition when she fell ill, so he came to ask for my advice. Before he could do that, he had to tell me everything." She gave Feng Sun a gloating smile after she said that. Feng Sun was rendered speechless. He couldn't help but flick Feng Wu's forehead with a finger. "You naughty girl. You almost got me." Feng Wu laughed. "Poor Master Zwa and Master Dugu. If they find out what happened, they'll hate their wives." Feng Sun said, "That's for sure. His Majesty was so ruthless." "If I were His Majesty," Feng Wu smiled a little, "I would never let those two ladies go unpunished. They haven't paid the price yet." "Do you have a plan?" Feng Sun was very interested in punishing the two mean ladies. If it were up to me, I would send the 2 men some beautiful women, gentle, talented young women, to be precise. The younger and prettier they are, the more damage they'll do. Chapter 1507 Untitled. Chapter 1507 Untitled. Feng Sun's eyes lit up, and he kept his gaze on Feng Wu. The girl was so clever. She was able to kill subtly without spilling any blood. If Master Zhua and Master Duge realized that they had been stripped half-naked and flogged in front of everyone because of something their wives did, they would never be able to stand it. And just as they were feeling inferior and vulnerable, those gentle, pretty young maids would show up. Little Feng Wu, you're so. Anyone who knows you well won't dare make an enemy of you. That's such a scary idea. You know what? Just be my friend. Feng Wu chuckled. Seeing the way Feng Wu laughed wholeheartedly, Feng Sun inwardly smiled bitterly. This girl. Who could know how scary she was deep down? Hey, where's Jun Linyuan? Feng Wu asked curiously. She hadn't seen him since she started roasting fish. She hadn't thought much of it when he was there all the time, despite the fact that he was the only heir to the throne. However, she actually missed him when he wasn't there. What an odd idea, Feng Wu thought to herself. Feng Sun said, Boss Jun is halfway up the hill. Right there. Look, there's Feng. He's guarding Boss Jun right now. Feng Wu narrowed her eyes and told Feng Sun, go fetch him. Feng Sun immediately shook his head. No, I won't. Boss Jun is very fussy. If I interrupt his cultivation, he'll kill me. Feng Wu said, don't worry, I'm here. Just go. Feng Sun waved his hands repeatedly. No, I can't. I just can't do it. Feng Wu rolled her eyes grumpily. If you're not going, I will, all right? Feng Sun stopped her. Forget it. You shouldn't go either. Although Boss Jun seems to treat you kindly enough, you can't be as important as his cultivation. He'll kick you away. Feng Wu had made up her mind. Don't worry, I'll bring Jun Linyuan here. She walked off after that. Behind her, Feng Sun and Xian Yi exchanged looks and saw resigned smiles on each other's faces. Feng Wu was too young and too naive. Where did she get the idea that she could bring Boss Jun here? She was dreaming. By then, Feng Wu had already reached Jun Linyuan. He was meditating with his eyes closed and ignoring the rest of the world. Feng stood next to him, holding a sword and looking like a god. He was there to watch over Jun Linyuan to make sure that he grew stronger. When Feng saw Feng Wu, he shot her a warning glance to walk away as soon as possible. However, Feng Wu had made the declaration already, and she found it too embarrassing to back away now. Jun Linyuan. Standing in front of Jun Linyuan, she put her hands behind her back and smiled at him. Feng paled. Jun Linyuan took his cultivation very seriously, and he could be relentless at times. Feng Wu would face severe consequences after disturbing him like this. Involuntarily, Feng wanted to shield Feng Wu with his own body. To his surprise, Jun Linyuan's bright eyes snapped open. Chapter 1508 Outsider 1. Chapter 1508 Outsider 1. Feng was about to shield Feng Wu behind him when Jun Linyuan rose to his feet. His eyes were mesmerizing. They were exceptionally bright when set off against his well-defined features. Feng Wu backed away involuntarily when she saw those cold eyes. Well, please don't let me keep you from your cultivation. I'm off. She then turned to flee. But Jun Linyuan grabbed her hand before she could walk away. The look in his eyes was so terrifying that she felt a chill run down her spine. She regretted her decision now. Had she known better, she wouldn't have tried to mess with the big boss here. You're here already, you're not going anywhere. With a slight pull from the crown prince, Feng Wu fell into his arms. She asked, what are you doing? The crown prince raised his straight dark eyebrows. What do you think I'm going to do? Feng Wu said, whatever you're thinking, you're not doing it. Let me go. Jun Linyuan started walking, dragging Feng Wu along with him. Hey! Jun Linyuan! What are you doing? Let go of me! Feng Wu cried out. There were a lot of people nearby, and Feng Wu's yelling immediately caught their attention. Seeing that everyone was turning in their direction, Feng Wu lowered her voice and said, Jun Linyuan, what are you doing? Jun Linyuan raised his well-defined chin and shot an arrogant glance at Feng Wu. What do you think I'm doing? Feng Wu said, You. Jun Linyuan found her reaction idiotic. Why did you come here? Feng Wu said, I roasted some moonfish and thought maybe you would like to try some. Jun Linyuan asked, Did you roast it yourself? Feng Wu said proudly, Of course I did. Jun Linyuan said, Let's go then. Feng Wu glanced at him. I thought Feng Sun said you didn't like fish. She had come here to tease him because Feng Sun said Jun Linyuan didn't like fish. But that didn't seem to be the case. The Crown Prince gave her a you idiot look. That's right. I don't like it. Don't go then. You don't have to force yourself. We'll stay right here. Feng Wu tugged at Jun Linyuan's hand as she spoke. Jun Linyuan rubbed Feng Wu's head with his free hand. Don't do that. You're messing up my hair. Feng Wu stomped her foot in frustration. The Crown Prince grinned. You're so dumb. Feng Wu said, Jun Linyuan. Call me dumb again, I dare you. Jun Linyuan put both hands behind his back and walked at an unhurried pace while holding Feng Wu's hand in his right one. They looked like a loving young couple. Feng Wu tried to throw his hand off as they walked, but his grip was so tight that nothing she did could shake it. Next to the grill, Feng Wu had roasted 5 moonfish before she left, but when she came back, she saw that Feng Sun and Xian Yi were crouching in front of the grill and staring at the roast fish that was turning on it. The 5 cooked ones were already gone. She asked, Where are the 5 roast fish? Feng Sun raised his head and looked at her with his teary big eyes. We finished them. Feng Wu asked, seriously? Feng Sun said, seriously? Feng Wu said, You pig! Those fish are all 1/2 meter long, and they weigh dozens of kilos even after they're cleaned up. How could you eat them all? Chapter 1509, Outsider 2. Chapter 1509, Outsider 2. Feng Sun nodded eagerly. Yes. Feng Wu rested her hands on her waist and looked up at the sky in resignation. What was she supposed to say? They're just so delicious. I was so tempted, and I couldn't stop eating. Before I knew it, I ate them all. And what's amazing is that you can never get too full with this fish. No matter how many I eat, I can always eat more. My stomach has turned into a bottomless pit. Feng Wu said, You certainly have your argument all prepared. Feng Sun looked at her eagerly and ran happily to her side. Xiao Wu, we've prepared the fish. Can you cook one more for us? Feng Wu rolled her eyes. One more? That's it? Feng Sun shook his head repeatedly. No, of course not. 50 more at least. You wish. Feng Wu smacked him on the head. There are 5 here, and that's all I'm going to cook for you. Feng Sun pouted and gave Feng Wu a pleading look. 3 then. Feng Wu said grumpily. Feng Sun said, No, 5's fine. 5 it is, then. Feng Wu glanced at the fish on the grill and said, These 2 are almost cooked. Eat them first. Feng Sun and Xian Yi exchanged looks, but neither of them moved. Feng Wu said, I thought you liked this fish. Why won't you eat them? Feng Sun frowned and looked very reluctant, but he still removed the 2 fish from the grill in the end. Feng Wu stared at him. Feng Sun tore a piece of flesh off the fish and glanced at Feng Wu. She still stared at him in silence. Feng Sun had no choice but to put the fish in his mouth. But, the next second, bah! Feng Sun spat it out right away. Gosh! That's terrible! How can it taste so bad? Why is it bitter? Feng Sun stared at Feng Wu in disbelief. Feng Wu shrugged. She didn't have an answer either. How can this happen? I copied everything you did in roasting them and used the same condiments, but why do they taste so different? Feng Sun was utterly confused. He had thought that his roast fish should at least be half as good as Feng Wu's. But now, forget half, it wasn't even 1/10, no, 1/100th as good as hers. That was unbelievable. Xiao Wu, how did you do it? Why is our fish so different? Feng Sun stared at Feng Wu in utter disbelief. Feng Wu shrugged. I don't really have a recipe at all. You know what? You shouldn't waste it. Finish the fish. Feng Sun said, I'm not eating it. Xian Yi said, neither am I. Just then, Feng Sun's eyes flickered, because he saw someone coming their way. And there was another pretty girl behind that person. The third and fifth princesses? Feng Sun's and Xian Yi's faces darkened a little. Jun Wuxiao was known for her arrogance, and her sister was notoriously timid. The two teenagers liked neither of them. Brother Feng Sun, there you are. Jun Wuxiao walked up to Feng Sun with her sister and smiled at him. It was common knowledge that Jun Wuxiao was in love with Feng Sun, because she had raised quite a fuss, trying to catch his attention. But what did Feng Sun think of her? In Feng Sun's own words, he would rather step on shit. Therefore, he wanted to slip away as soon as he saw Jun Wuxiao. Chapter 1510 Outsider 3. Chapter 1510 Outsider 3. But Jun Wuxiao seemed to have anticipated that Feng Sun would try to run, so she held her ground and blocked his way. Brother Feng Sun, aren't you happy to see me? Are you leaving already? Jun Wuxiao stood in front of Feng Sun and looked at him with teary eyes. After all, she was a princess, and her parents were just around the corner, so Feng Sun couldn't be too harsh on her. Hence he had to smile awkwardly as he said, My princess, you're mistaken. I'm just standing up to welcome you and your sister. To what do we owe this honor? Jun Wuxiao was glad to hear that, and she smiled, looking as pretty as a blossoming flower. Feng Sun, do you like to see me that much? How about I come and visit you tomorrow? Jun Wuxiao stepped forward with her delicate chin raised, tugged at Feng Sun's wide sleeve, and looked at him eagerly. Feng Sun looked as if he had just swallowed a fly. Please don't. You really don't have to do that, my princess. His head was already aching. Feng Wu glanced at Feng Sun as she roasted the fish. It was quite a teasing look. Was that girl laughing at him? Feng Sun threw a dirty look at her. Feng Wu made a face at him. Yes, she was laughing at him, because he couldn't even handle Jun Wuxiao. Feng Sun snarled at Feng Wu. Jun Wuxiao was Empress Duga's daughter, and that woman was the emperor's favorite, so he couldn't afford to offend the girl. He wasn't Boss Jun, who could strike anyone he didn't like with his sword and tell them to get lost. Seeing the way Feng Wu and Feng Sun interacted with each other, Jun Wuxiao was furious. Her gaze shifted from Feng Sun to Feng Wu. Why, I was wondering who it was. Isn't it Miss Feng Wu? Crossing her arms, Jun Wuxiao walked around Feng Wu and looked her up and down, as if she was examining her. She was sizing Feng Wu up. Other people would have been shaken by that searching look, but Feng Wu. She wasn't the least bit disturbed, and she looked perfectly calm as well. She didn't react to Jun Wuxiao's gaze at all. Jun Wuxiao narrowed her eyes. This Feng Wu was so annoying. She had made Jun Wuxiao miserable in the World Tower last time, so when the princess saw Feng Wu again, she was filled with rage. Miss Feng Wu, what are you doing here? Are you roasting fish? Jun Wuxiao stared at the grill with a displeased look on her face. Feng Wu didn't want to talk to her, so she only hummed. Jun Wuxiao's face darkened a little. She had never been ignored like this before. Growing up, she was used to enjoying wealth and honor, not to mention that the Empress was her mother, so no one had ever dared to offend her. However, this insignificant Feng Wu kept ignoring her. Damn her! Damn her! However, Jun Wuxia had to feign a magnanimous attitude, just to show Feng Sun that she was a kind, gentle princess. Feng Wu, I hear that you're an excellent cook, and everyone in the Crown Prince's residence can't stop singing your praises. Is that true? Jun Wuxia's eyes glinted. She tugged at her sister's hand, telling the latter that she should speak now. The shy fifth princess suddenly interjected. I heard that your fish-flavored shredded pork is amazing. Can I try it? Jun Wuxia glanced at her little attendant and seemed pleased. Chapter 15:11 One thing leads to another. 1. Chapter 15:11 One thing leads to another. 1. Jun Wuxia decided that she should keep calm, and tried to irritate Feng Wu instead. She believed that Feng Wu would be the loser if the latter lost her temper. Feng Wu glanced at the fifth princess and shook her head. I don't have the necessary ingredients here, and I won't be able to make that dish. Sorry to disappoint you. The princess nodded and looked crestfallen, but she didn't say anything else. Jun Wuxia threw a dirty look at her sister. The younger princess bit her lower lip and looked intimidated. Jun Wuxia wanted to smack her on the head. She was so useless. Since her sister wasn't of any help, Jun Wuxia had to step up herself. Miss Feng Wu, since you're such a great cook, why don't you come and work as my personal chef? Jun Wuxia stared at Feng Wu in a provoking manner. Feng Wu rolled her eyes inwardly and said indifferently, No, I don't think so. The rejection was so straightforward that Jun Wuxia's face darkened. She stared at Feng Wu with a ferocious look in her eyes. Feng Wu let her. The gaze didn't affect her at all, and she still worked on her fish in an unhurried manner. Jun Wuxia gritted her teeth. Feng Wu, is that how you treat a princess? She glared at Feng Wu. Feng Wu didn't reply. She didn't even speak to Jun Wuxia directly. Instead, she turned around and told Feng Sun, Feng III, if I'm in a bad mood, the fish I roast will be affected. That was a reminder and a threat. She was telling Feng Sun that he had to solve his own problem himself. Feng Sun immediately took the hint and started dragging Jun Wuxia away. The princess frowned. I'm not leaving. I won't. Feng Sun pulled the two princesses away by force. Feng Sun stared at Jun Wuxia a few dozen meters away. Didn't you see? Boss Jun's face was already livid. Especially you, Jun Wuxia, are you trying to enrage Boss Jun? Have you considered the consequences? Jun Wuxia said, I. Feng Sun stuffed 2 roast fish in the 2 princess' hands and said, There you are. Take the fist away and share it with everyone else. He then turned around and left. Hey! Feng Sun. Jun Wuxia held the fish and stomped her foot. Feng Sun didn't even look back when he waved goodbye. Jun Wuxia sulked. Wow! Is this little Feng Wu's roast fish? I heard that Her Majesty was ill from anger because of this fish. She'll be so happy when I give the fish to her. The 5th princess smiled happily and ran back happily. However, she only took a few steps before a strong force knocked into her from behind. Caught by surprise, she fell forward. Thump! She stumbled forward and fell face down on the ground. The ground in front of her didn't have any grass and was bare. The 5th princess's face was covered with dust from the fall. To make matters worse. Oh no! My roast fish! The princess was almost in tears. The fish which Feng Sun had given to her had already fallen out of her arms. It rolled over the ground before falling into a pit 10 meters away. The fish was covered in dust as well. It was too dirty to be eaten. Jun Wuxia grinned maliciously. Her eyes glinted with satisfaction. Chapter 15:12 One thing leads to another. 2. Chapter 15:12 One thing leads to another. 2. Sister, The fifth princess pursed her lips and looked up at her sister in regret. Jun Wuxia appeased her in a sympathetic tone. Honey, you're too old to take a fall like that. Watch where you're going. Does it hurt? Are you all right? Her sister said pitifully, Sister, I'm fine. But the fish. I was going to give it to Her Majesty, but now. Jun Wuxia patted her on the head. Honey, how sweet. You're still thinking of Her Majesty after taking a fall like that. I'll send Her Majesty your regards. Now, go get your wounds treated. The poor princess was sent away just like that. Jun Wuxia, on the other hand, went to see the Empress Dowager with the roast fish. Right now, the Empress Dowager had already woken up, but she looked very malnourished after only eating vegetables for so many days, and she felt so weak that she could barely open her eyes. Your Majesty, Your Majesty! The Empress Dowager was whimpering in bed when she heard someone calling her. She looked over her shoulder and saw that it was Jun Wuxia. She had never liked this granddaughter and was rather impatient to see the girl. She closed her eyes and ignored Jun Wuxia. Jun Wuxia cursed her grandmother in her head, but she still smiled brightly. Your Majesty, look what I've brought you. Jun Wuxia showed the fish to the old lady. Gosh, is that a roast moon fish? The Empress Dowager's eyes lit up. Jun Wuxia nodded. Yes, it is. I heard that it tastes amazing. Your Majesty, would you like to try it? Recalling that it was Feng Wu who roasted the moon fish, the Empress Dowager immediately lost all interest. She waved weakly. No, I don't want it. Take it away. Jun Wuxia was dumbfounded, because the rumor was that the Empress Dowager wanted to eat the fish. Had she been misinformed? But Your Majesty, I roasted this fish myself. Won't you give it a go? You roasted it? The Empress Dowager's face lit up. You made it? Not that brat Feng Wu? Hearing the change in her tone, Jun Wuxia immediately nodded. That's right. I roasted it myself. Your Majesty, please try it. It smells really nice. Your Majesty! She swayed the Empress Dowager's arm back and forth as she pleaded with her. The Empress Dowager usually doted on Jun Linyuan alone and ignored everyone else, so Jun Wuxia had never dared to do this. However, she was lying there now and looked very weak, which made her seem much less aggressive, so Jun Wuxia took the chance. Despite her usual pride, the Empress Dowager didn't turn the girl down. She only glanced at Jun Wuxia and said, All right. She swallowed as she spoke. It was just that the roast fish smelled so nice. More precisely, the aroma from earlier had made such an impression on the Empress Dowager that she now thought that roast fish was the most delicious food in the world. She swallowed so hard that even Jun Wuxia could see it. So, the old hag is a foodie, Jun Wuxia thought to herself. Thinking that she had found the Empress Dowager's weakness, she was thrilled. At the same time, seeing Feng Sun return empty-handed, Feng Wu asked in bewilderment, Hey, did you throw away both of your roast fish? Chapter 1513 One Thing Leads to Another, 3. Chapter 1513 One Thing Leads to Another, 3. Feng Sun said, Throw them away? Why would I do that? I gave them away. Feng Wu stared at him. What did you say? Feng Sun said, I gave them to someone else. Feng Wu stared at Feng Sun as if she was looking at a crazy person. The look gave Feng Sun the creep. Why are you looking at me like that? Feng Wu gave him a you idiot look. Feng Sun asked, Huh? Why? What did I do? Feng Wu scratched her head. Well. Feng Sun fidgeted. Little Feng Wu, what's wrong? Say something. Please don't tell me that you tampered with the fish. Feng Wu cleared her throat. Well, I don't think it's a big deal. I just sprinkled a little something on them, and it isn't lethal. By the way, who did you give them to? Feng Sun said, Jun Wuxia and her sister. Feng Wu said, Well, that's all right then. Feng Sun stared at Feng Wu in resignation. What on earth did you sprinkle on the fish? Feng Wu cleared her throat. Well, it's nothing. It was just a little tickling powder. Feng Sun stared at her. Why would you do that? Feng Wu cleared her throat again. Well, I mistook it for paprika when I pulled it out of my pouch. Don't worry, it isn't a big deal. They may not eat the fish anyway. She had never liked Jun Wuxia, so she was elated by the prospect that the princess might suffer a little. However, no matter how smart Feng Wu was, she could never have expected that Jun Wuxia would give the fish to the Empress Dowager. Jun Wuxia tore the flesh off the fish, put it on an exquisite porcelain plate, and cut it into small pieces. They were glossy and looked very tempting. Your Majesty, there you go. Jun Wuxia smiled and watched the Empress Dowager eagerly. She stared at Jun Wuxia. Are you sure you roasted this yourself? Jun Wuxia pursed her lips and nodded. Still staring at Jun Wuxia, the Empress Dowager asked, Are you sure Feng Wu didn't roast this? Jun Wuxia smiled and shook her head. Your Majesty, she's not the only one who can roast fish. The Empress Dowager nodded and finally decided to eat. Granny Lan didn't look too pleased, and she kept her stern gaze on Jun Wuxia. Your Majesty, Miss Feng Wu left instructions about your diet, but this fish… Shut up. The Empress Dowager glared at Granny Lan. You can't tell me what to do. Go away. Granny Lan was speechless. Poor Granny Lan. Because of what happened earlier, she didn't dare push the Empress Dowager too hard now. She could only watch as the old lady ate one piece after another. She frowned as she ate. Is this how roast fish is supposed to taste? Jun Wuxia nodded with a smile. The Empress Dowager snorted. It's not that impressive at all. Jun Wuxia paled a little. The Empress Dowager stared at her. Or does it taste like this because it was roasted by you? Jun Wuxia paled even more. The Empress Dowager put the dish aside after eating 3 pieces. It's nothing special at all. Jun Wuxia bit her lower lip and looked unsettled. She couldn't understand it. Wasn't Feng Wu supposed to be an amazing cook who had impressed the Crown Prince so much? Why didn't the Empress Dowager like the fish? The rumor couldn't be any more wrong. Chapter 15:14 One thing leads to another. 4. Chapter 15:14 One thing leads to another. 4. You can leave now. The Empress Dowager couldn't be bothered to tell Jun Wuxia off and just waved to send her on her way. Jun Wuxia hesitated and wanted to say something, but she didn't say a word in the end. She left the room after giving the Empress Dowager a bow. The Empress Dowager had an odd feeling as soon as Jun Wuxia left, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. Granny Lan was keeping an eye on the Empress Dowager, and she panicked when she saw the old lady twisting and turning. Your Majesty, what's wrong? Are you not feeling well? The Empress Dowager scratched her throat. It's quite itchy here. Granny Lan paled. Your throat? Anywhere else? The Empress Dowager rubbed her belly. Here too. It feels like 1,000 ants are crawling under my clothes. I feel awful. Granny Lan's face darkened. Arg, all of a sudden, the Empress Dowager cried out, It's so itchy. My face is itchy, my body is itchy, and I feel itchy everywhere. Help me. The tickling powder was very effective. In a matter of minutes, the Empress Dowager was already whimpering in bed. Granny Lan was terrified. Because that was a very severe reaction. She immediately summoned someone. Go report to His Majesty, Master Chu, and Miss Feng Wu. Get Miss Feng Wu here. The Empress Dowager had a lot of servants, and they all dashed off in various directions. They seemed so panic-stricken that everyone outside panicked along with them. What's wrong? What's wrong? So many people are coming out of Her Majesty's place. Is something wrong with Her Majesty again? Oh no. By the look of it, it has to be something severe. Because they all lived very close by, Emperor Wu soon heard about it. His head was resting comfortably in Empress Duga's lap as she massaged his shoulder when he heard the news. He immediately sprang up from the bed. Something's wrong with Her Majesty again? Emperor Wu felt like screaming. What was wrong with his mother these days? Why was her life in danger all the time? Have you summoned Master Chu? Emperor Wu shouted as he put on his robe. Your Majesty, someone has done so, but Master Chu did say before that he was going to go into the mountains to find some medicinal ingredients, so he may not be in the campsite right now. Emperor Wu flared up. Go get Feng Wu then. Yes, of course. Right now, Feng Wu was roasting some fish while chatting with Feng Sun. She was quite efficient. In a few seconds, she had roasted 2 fish already. Feng Sun and Xian Yi were about to fight for them when they felt a cold, suffocating gaze. They felt a chill run down their spines, and they turned their heads involuntarily. It was Boss Jun. There was no warmth in his eyes as he stared at the roast fish. Feng Sun and Xian Yi shuddered. Without thinking, they gave one of the fish to Jun Linyuan. Feng Sun nodded in an ingratiating manner. Boss Jun, please. Enjoy the fish. Not only did Feng Sun offer him the fish, he also placed it on a pretty porcelain plate along with some cutlery. He and Xian Yi had been eating the fish with their bare hands this whole time, which looked quite barbaric. Chapter 1515 Untitled. Chapter 1515 Untitled. The Crown Prince snorted and looked slightly more satisfied. Feng Sun and Xian Yi shared the other fish. Just then, Miss Feng Wu, help, please help us. The one leading the team was Laxu, the most capable maid working under Granny Lan. Because Laxu had been the one to come and get Feng Wu each time, Feng Wu recognized the young maid. What's wrong? Feng Sun wolfed down his half of the fish and mumbled the question. Her Majesty isn't feeling well and has fainted again, Laxu said hastily, sounding anxious. Feng Wu raised her head and looked surprised. That's impossible. Feng Wu gave it some thought and said, if Her Majesty's following the diet I stipulated, nothing should happen. Laxu dropped to her knees and begged Feng Wu in tears. There's really something wrong with Her Majesty. Please help her. Please. Jun Linyuan had already risen to his feet. Feng Wu stood up in resignation and said, All right, I'll go have a look. But, she glanced at Jun Linyuan over her shoulder. But if Her Majesty insists that I can't treat her, I'm not going to beg her. Jun Linyuan rubbed her head. Although he didn't seem to have paid any attention to what was going on, he actually knew everything and was aware of what Feng Wu had to put up with. No problem. Jun Linyuan flicked Feng Wu's forehead with his long finger. They soon arrived at the Empress Dowager's tent. Although it was only a temporary tent, as the Empress Dowager's residence, it was still spacious, clean, and fully equipped with everything. The place was elegantly decorated, which lifted one's mood. Your Majesty, please wake up. Please. The doctor's here. Granny Lan shouted and shouted, but the Empress Dowager only grunted and couldn't form a coherent sentence. Her head had gone numb and her eyes were glassy. She was curled up in bed and trembling uncontrollably. White foam had gathered at the corners of her mouth. The Empress Dowager looked at Feng Wu with unfocused eyes when she walked up to her, and could no longer recognize the girl. Feng Wu sat down by the bed and checked the Empress Dowager's pulse. Everyone, Emperor Wu included, looked at Feng Wu without batting an eyelash. They all tried to find some hint from the look on Feng Wu's face to figure out what the Empress Dowager's condition was. However, Feng Wu remained unperturbed and didn't let her face reveal anything. Even Emperor Wu, who was great at reading people, couldn't tell a thing, let alone the others. That was the amazing thing about Feng Wu. Feng Wu was a lot quicker at checking a pulse than other people. With one touch, she knew that the Empress Dowager had been poisoned by the tickling powder. She glanced around the room and immediately saw the half-eaten fish. Did Her Majesty eat this roast fish? Granny Lon nodded repeatedly. That's right. Her Royal Highness, the third princess, brought it here, but Her Majesty didn't eat much. Feng Wu looked at Feng Sun. Feng Sun looked embarrassed. Princess Jun Wuxia brought the fish here? Is it really? Feng Sun's stomach lurched, and he looked at Feng Wu. It's so itchy. So itchy. The Empress Dowager tossed and turned in bed and felt miserable. The Empress Dowager was already very weak, and the tickling powder only worsened her condition. Chapter 15-16 Untitled. Chapter 15-16 Untitled. Did Princess Jun Wuxia bring the fish? Feng Wu asked again. The Empress Dowager was only half conscious, so she replied to Feng Wu's question. She cooked it herself. It tasted awful. Feng Wu didn't say a word. Emperor Wu looked at Feng Wu. Was there something wrong with the fish? Feng Wu cleared her throat. Emperor Wu stared at her. Was it because of the roast fish? Feng Wu said, That's right. The roast fish wasn't very clean. That was an understatement. Feng Wu had actually been the one to put the tickling powder on the fish, but she never expected the fish to end up in the Empress Dowager's hands. It wasn't clean. How dare she do that, giving Her Majesty unclean food? Bring the princess here. Emperor Wu was obviously infuriated. Feng Wu and Feng Sun exchanged conflicted looks. Poor Jun Wuxia. She had no idea that she was in a lot of trouble. Right now, she was talking to Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhua. Feng Wu's roast fish? It tasted awful. She rolled her eyes. Mrs. Zhua said, Are you sure? Feng Sun and Xian Yi were fighting over it. How can it not taste good? Jun Wuxia said, Heh. I tried it myself, and I can tell good food from bad, okay? Both Mrs. Dugu and Mrs. Zhua gave her strange looks. Jun Wuxia flared up. Hey, what's with those looks? What kind of person do you think I am? Don't assume things. I'm telling you, even Her Majesty didn't like her roast fish. She put it down after just a few bites. Mrs. Zhua and Mrs. Dugu still looked unconvinced. They had talked to Her Majesty before and saw how excited the old lady had been when she thought that they had brought her the fish. Feeling wronged, Jun Wuxia lost her temper. But before she could do anything, Master Bai, the eunuch serving Emperor Wu, arrived. Your Royal Highness, His Majesty wants to see you. Master Bai's tone was very calm, but one could tell that there was an anxious look in his eyes. But Jun Wuxia didn't notice. She asked excitedly, Does my father want to see me? Great. I was planning to go and see His Majesty just now. She was convinced of the happy notion that she was the Emperor's favorite daughter. Otherwise, why would he want to see only her? Seeing how happy Jun Wuxia was, Master Bai said hesitantly, Your Royal Highness, actually. Jun Wuxia had no idea what Master Bai was trying to tell her. She patted him on the shoulder and smiled. Bai, take this gold ring as a reward. Don't worry. There's more to come. Master Bai said, Your Royal Highness, actually, it's Her Majesty. Jun Wuxia was thrilled. She wondered if the Empress Dowager had remembered how considerate Jun Wuxia had been to bring her the food, and had told Jun Wuxia's father about it. The more she thought about it, the more excited she became. Looking into Master Bai's eyes, she asked, Where's my father? Bai, tell me, where is His Majesty? His Majesty is with Her Majesty the Empress Dowager, and he couldn't wait to flog Jun Wuxia. Chapter 15-17 Untitled. Chapter 15-17 Untitled. However, Jun Wuxia was too excited to notice Master Bai's awkward expression, and she dashed off, moving as effortlessly as a happy butterfly. Master Bai shook his head and heaved a long sigh as he watched her scamper off. My dear princess, I hope you're strong enough to take it, he thought. Jun Wuxia rushed into the Empress Dowager's tent excitedly. Father, did you want to see me? Laxu held up the curtain for Jun Wuxia when she saw her coming. However, Jun Wuxia only heard a furious voice. Kneel! The sound was like a thunderclap in Jun Wuxia's ears. Frightened, she stood there in bewilderment and stared at Emperor Wu in disbelief. Father, Jun Wuxia sounded scared, because she really was terrified. Emperor Wu glared at her. Kneel. Now. He sounded so fierce. He had never spoken to her like this before. Jun Wuxia immediately burst into tears. Emperor Wu had a lot of daughters but only one mother. Needless to say, they didn't mean the same to him. Make her kneel. Emperor Wu bellowed. Jun Wuxia was dumbfounded. She even forgot to cry. Raising her head, she stared at Emperor Wu in bewilderment. There was no expression on her face, as if she had really been struck by lightning. Make her kneel. Make her kneel. Those words kept replaying in her head. Emperor Wu had quite a few guards around him, and two of them stepped out. One grabbed Jun Wuxia's arm, while the other one pressed her down. Thump! Poor Jun Wuxia. She was forced to drop to her knees. Father! Jun Wuxia finally realized what was happening. She burst into tears, crawled toward Emperor Wu on all fours, and cried loudly as she wrapped her arms around his thigh. Father! Father! Why are you doing this to me? Father, what did I do? Jun Wuxia cried so sadly and looked heartbroken. Emperor Wu pitied her for a second or two, but when he thought about his bedridden mother, he flared up again. He stared at Jun Wuxia. Did you bring Her Majesty the roast fish? Jun Wuxia was perplexed, but she still nodded. Emperor Wu asked, Did you cook it yourself? Jun Wuxia felt conflicted. Of course the answer was no, but she had already told the Empress Dowager that she had cooked the fish herself. Was there something wrong with it? That shouldn't be the case. What could possibly be wrong with the fish? If she admitted now that she hadn't roasted the fish herself, it would damage the Empress Dowager's trust in her. Did you roast it yourself or not? Emperor Wu glared at her. Yes, I roasted it myself, Jun Wuxia acknowledged it. You roasted the fish, brought it here, and fed it to Her Majesty, all by yourself? Emperor Wu looked into Jun Wuxia's eyes. Jun Wuxia said, Yes. Slap. Emperor Wu slapped her in the face. How dare you? Blood oozed out from the corner of her mouth, and she was dumbfounded. Father! How dare you try to harm Her Majesty? Why did you do it? Speak. Emperor Wu's eyes were bloodshot red. It pained him to see the way the Empress Dowager lay weakly in bed. Chapter 1518 Untitled. Chapter 1518 Untitled. Jun Wuxia felt wronged and perplexed, and she burst into tears. Father, it wasn't me. Why would I do such a thing? All I've ever wanted to do is please Her Majesty. I would never harm her. Father! You didn't try to harm Her Majesty? Emperor Wu smirked. You roasted the fish, you brought it here, and you fed it to Her Majesty. But now, you're saying that you didn't do anything? Jun Wuxia, I've indulged you too much, and you've forgotten how to behave yourself. How dare you do this to Her Majesty? Jun Wuxia was really terrified now. She shook her head as she cried. No. No. Father, I didn't do that. I really didn't. I didn't roast the fish. That's right. I didn't cook it myself. Emperor Wu was so angry that he laughed. Now that something has gone wrong, you're saying that you didn't roast the fish? So, tell me, who cooked it? She did. Jun Wuxia pointed at Feng Wu. Immediately, all eyes were on Feng Wu. Feng Wu was too good an actress for Jun Wuxia to handle. She was a professional. There was the most innocent look on Feng Wu's stunning face. She shrugged and looked confused. Your Royal Highness, I've been trying my best to stay out of your way these days, fearing that I may upset you. But I really didn't see this coming. I'm trying to stay as far away from you as possible, but you're still blaming it on me. Feng Wu's tears came very fast. She cried so prettily, and together with her stunning beauty, it was heartbreaking to see her like this. Compared with her, Jun Wuxiao was howling like an animal. Jun Wuxiao was very easily agitated, and she was infuriated by what Feng Wu said. She was the child of Empress Dugu, and Emperor Wu's favorite daughter. She had never felt so mistreated before. Springing to her feet, she jumped at Feng Wu. "Feng Wu! You set me up! I'm gonna kill you!" She tried to grab Feng Wu's hair. Feng Wu had been standing next to Jun Linyuan, and 100 Jun Wuxias put together wouldn't be able to threaten Feng Wu if she hid behind Jun Linyuan. However, since Jun Wuxia said that Feng Wu had set her up, Feng Wu decided to give her what she wanted. Feng Wu acted as if she was frightened, and she quickly hid behind Emperor Wu. What she didn't notice was that when she ran behind Emperor Wu, someone else's extended hand froze in midair. He stared at Feng Wu with cold, furious eyes. Jun Wuxia was so infuriated that she could no longer think straight. She charged at Feng Wu, waving her arms and ignoring who was in the way. When Feng Wu hid behind Emperor Wu, Jun Wuxia flung herself into Emperor Wu's arms. Jun Wuxia's weapon was her nails. They would suddenly grow very long and sharp when she lost her temper. Her long, sharp nails slashed across Emperor Wu's cheeks. Poor Emperor Wu was caught off guard. If he had been vigilant, there was no way Jun Wuxia could have hurt him. Blood sprayed from his cheeks. Emperor Wu was dumbfounded. So was the crowd. Everyone stared at Jun Wuxia in astonishment. Those scratches! Jun Wuxia was in so much trouble. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.